Please remain standing. Let us pray. Loving God, as we gather together here tonight, help us to seek to represent fairly and well. We think about those who have given us this task. Help us to use resources wisely and well, representing all members of our community. Give us the discernment to make decisions that promote the common good, and the ability to recognise our responsibility to past, present and future. Lead us to respect the rights and needs of individuals and communities, accepting that our values are not always those of others. As trusted servants of the people of this borough, we ask for your blessings on our deliberations and on our efforts here tonight and in the future. May our personal faith give us strength to act honestly and well in all matters before us. Amen.
Amen. Please be seated. Before starting the meeting, could I ask all members to ensure that mobile phones are switched off to silent? Could I also remind everyone, and particularly members of the public present, that this meeting is being streamed as usual this evening. This means that the cameras may capture your image, and by your presence here you are deemed to be consenting to being filmed and to the use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting. Item 1 are declarations of interest. Does any member of the council wish to declare any relevant interest in which he or she has in any item or issue before this council meeting? Advice on the declarations of interests has been placed on each councillor's lectern. Members declaring an interest are also asked to indicate the subject matter of the declared interest, the minute number and page number to which the declaration relates if relevant, whether the interest is of a personal, prejudicial or a disclosable pecuniary nature. I would also ask members to also give written notice of any interest declared on the form which is in front of each member tonight and hand it in to an officer from Democratic Services. Do we have any interests? Councillor Jones.
Mr. Mayor, if I could declare a personal interest in my wife who is children too.
Thank you. Councillor Mallon.
Mr. Mayor, I declare a personal interest in my wife works together.
Thank you. Councillor Esright.
Likewise, my wife works at a local primary school, so personal interest.
Thank you. Councillor Bevan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, my wife works in a primary school in the borough.
Councillor Shorey.
My partner works for Berry Council.
Councillor Pixton.
My partner works for the NHS.
Oh, marvellous. Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Pannell.
Mr. Mayor, my partner works for the NHS.
Okay. If at any point during the proceedings you realise that you do need to declare an interest, please do it at the time. Councillor Quinn. That's fine. Added to be safe than sorry. Any others? Thank you for that. Before we move on to the rest of the last meeting, I did say that I would start the tradition, or our tradition during my mayoralty, of wearing various chains of office from the other boroughs. Tonight I want to inform members that I am wearing the Ratcliffe chains, and we have the Ratcliffe mace in front of the mayor's desk. I did face some questioning from some members of the council after the last meeting. Evidently I missed out Whitefield. That's because the deputy mayor always wears the Whitefield chains, so the Whitefield chains make an appearance at every council until next year when I might change something. I might wear something else, but whatever. So we just thought I'd clear that up. So next meeting I'll probably wear the Ramsbottom chains at the next meeting. Item 2 are the minutes. Is it your wish that the minutes of the meeting of the council held on the 30th of November be signed as a true and correct record? Well, thank you. Thank you. Item 3, mayoral communications. Firstly, I would like to pay tribute to Bury residents Sharon Bannister, Steve Grant and Betty Kenyon, whose contributions have been acknowledged in the Queen's New Year's Honours List. My heartfelt congratulations go to them all, and I have actually written to them congratulating them. I'm also delighted to report that over £5,000 was raised for my charities at the December's mayoral ball. The evening was a great success and those present were very generous in their support, and I'd like to personally, on behalf of myself and Ian, to thank each and every one of you for that. Finally, I would also like to pay tribute to all those who showed their support at this year's Holocaust Memorial Service. Yet again, this event was impeccably observed and proved a very moving occasion. Item 4 is public question time. A period of up to 30 minutes is set aside from questions from members of the public. 8 questions have been received, and I shall ask each to ask their question in turn, and the leader will respond. So first of all, I call on Mr. Andy Loynes to ask the first question about the closure of the walk-in centres.
Could the leader advise his and the council's wider position on the CCG's plans to close walk-in centres in both Bury and Prestwich?
Mr. Shorey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Loynes. It is the case, of course, that in September the Labour Group brought a motion to this council which called on the scrapping of the proposals to close the walk-in centres in Bury and Prestwich. We do have a number of concerns about proposals. I don't think it's been particularly well articulated how the impact of the closures will be dealt with by the proposed new model. You only have to look at the news after Christmas to see that the urgent care system in the country, in parts of Greater Manchester and even in Bury, is in crisis. We are concerned that by closing the walk-in centres, that will lead to an increase in demand of people using A&E services. On average, people are waiting almost 2 weeks for a GP appointment. So there is the potential, actually, that people won't be able to get an appointment to see a GP, and of course, they won't be able to use a walk-in centre walk-in centre service, which again will push more pressure on to A&Es. There was a report conducted by Monitor in 2013 which evaluated the whole walk-in centre service, and it made clear that in areas where there are high proportions of BME populations, as we have in Bury and we have in Prestwich, those communities disproportionately use walk-in centres, so we're concerned about the impacts in that regard. Last week, I've asked the CCG again to reconsider the proposals, and we'll be continuing a dialogue with them to hopefully make them change their minds. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Shorey. Mr. Loynes, do you have a supplementary?
Yes. Hours were cut at Christmas without notice, and that the contract with Pennine is due to expire at the end of March. Could I seek assurances from leaders of all the parties on the council that they will seek guarantees that the centres will be fully staffed so that a proper service can be provided during the consultation exercise that we're about to go through?
Councillor Shorey.
Well, I can certainly give that reassurance on behalf of the Labour group, and actually we submitted questions before the last CCG board meeting on that specific point. This is a commissioned service by the CCG, and they're commissioning these services with public money. They are therefore under an obligation to ensure that the services that they're commissioning are provided, and it is not acceptable, and it has been suggested that this is a closure via the back door, but that isn't acceptable. Those services are commissioned until the 1st of April and beyond, actually, in Prestwich, and they should be available to people of Bury until such time that a decision has been made to close them or otherwise. I've made that submission to them already, and you've got my assurance that we will continue that fight. I've also asked, as it happens, for the Bury contract to be extended. It needs to be extended to ensure actually that a proper and considered consultation takes place. There is no point having a consultation that ends on a Wednesday and then you make a decision to close Bury on a Friday. So I've asked for that contract to be extended, and as you understand it, the CCG are actively considering that proposal.
Thanks, Councillor Shorey. I call on Rick Coates to ask the second question about the CCG funding for GP provided services. Mr. Coates.
Does the council know why the GP-run Rock Health Centre walk-in service has not been closed, while independently provided NHS walk-in centres will be closed? And does it not think there is a clear conflict of interest when the CCG diverts money from other parts of the health service in order to maintain and expand GP-provided services, contrary to the clearly expressed wishes of the public?
Thank you, Councillor Shorey.
Thank you, Mr. Coates, for your question. I understand where you're coming from. Obviously, I don't know the rationale for the CCG's decision in that regard. But what I will undertake is to write to the CCG with your question in terms of getting a full and detailed explanation for you. What I would make the point, however, is that 5 years ago, I made the point to this very council chamber that with the introduction of the Health and Social Care Act 2012, there was obviously going to be issues of conflicts of interest when you have a clinical commissioning group whose membership includes people who are also GPs in the same locality. Now, that was an issue that was highlighted 5 years ago. It is potentially still an issue now. The point I'm making is the problem is systemic. It's not just in Bury, it's elsewhere. But we as elected politicians, you as members of the public, we have a right to ensure that all decisions are being made in the best interests of access to healthcare and for patients.
Thanks, Councillor Shorey. Do you have a supplementary, Mr. Coates?
The GP-run local medical committees in Oxfordshire and elsewhere are now proposing that GPs should set up private companies to charge for the primary care that is no longer provided by the NHS, including urgent evening and weekend care and minor surgery, things that might otherwise be done in walk-in centres. Does the council see this as part of the process of cutting NHS services in order to privatise them? And what will its response be if local GPs plan to do this here?
Councillor Shorey.
Well, I think the answer to that is potentially yes, it could be via the backdoor privatisation. Simon Stevens himself has come out and explained there's almost going to be a £20 billion gap for NHS services between now and 2020. The question is, how are you going to bridge that gap? Either you're going to reduce services or you're going to maintain services but have them delivered cheaper. And there is a real risk, and it's the point I've just made about what is being done in the interests of patients as opposed to profits. We certainly wouldn't welcome this as a Labour group. In fact, there's notice of motion a bit later on in the agenda which actually talks about privatisation and how we would challenge that. If that was happened here in Bury on a whole-scale basis, we would actively challenge that, and you've got my assurance on that.
Thank you, Councillor Shorey. I call on Andrew Simpson to ask the third question about the effect on A&E and GP services from the closure of walk-in centres.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can I ask the Leader of the Council how he believes the closures of Bury's 2 walk-in centres will affect our wider NHS services, especially A&E and GPs?
Councillor Shorey.
Thank you very much for your question, Mrs Simpson. Just refer to an earlier point about how if almost 60,000 people used the walk-in centres in the last year, where are they going to go and how is that demand going to be soaked up? Now, one area is A&E, which we know is already overburdened and is under pressure. The other potential outcome is going to your GP surgery. But my constituents, people I speak to from my own experience, it can take up to 2 weeks to get an appointment. There is a suggestion that you can use NHS 111. And I think at best, people's results in terms of using that service are mixed. In many circumstances, you're either told to go to your GP or go to A&E. In fact, I spent a considerable amount of time in A&E on Monday night because my partner rang NHS 111 and was told to get a doctor's appointment. She rang a local surgery and they said, well, we've got none. So then she had to go to A&E. And it was not an A&E related matter. It was putting stress, like happens on a number of occasions, on an already overburdened service. But to slightly reverse the question, really shouldn't be for me to explain what the potential impacts are on other services in terms of the A&Es or GP's practices. It should be for the CCG to really make it clear to the people of Bury what the outcomes will be. How will they deal with potential stresses? And I know, Mrs Simpson, that you're a practice manager in a practice in Salford, and I raise that point because you know better than most how difficult it is to embed change in terms of people's patterns of behaviour. For years now, we have been challenging the fact that people go to A&E unnecessarily. That was part of the rationale for introducing walk-in centres in the first place. How, in a very, very short period of time, are you going to condition people to use different services, particularly if you've not got the evidence to support that they will actually work?
Thanks, Councillor Shaw. And Mrs Simpson, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to commend Bury Labour Group for its fight against the walk-in centres and add that it's deeply, deeply disappointing to the residents of Bury that the Conservatives are supporting these closures and are not acting in the best interests of the residents they're supposed to serve. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question, I call on Nathan Baroda to ask the fourth question relating to the views of the public regarding closure of walk-in centres. Mr Baroda.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. In light of the CCG's own report, which states that 83% of residents surveyed disagree with the walk-in centre closures, what steps are being taken by the Leader of the Council to ensure that the will of the people is respected?
Mr Shorey.
Well, obviously this is a CCG-run process, but initially when the proposals came out, the CCG said they were going to have a public engagement. When we moved a motion here in the Chamber in September, the next week they came out and said they would have an engagement, but followed up by a full and legal consultation. As I understand it, the CCG proposed that the consultation would last 6 weeks. I came out last week and said it should be 2 months, the maximum period. As I understand it, they've now agreed to that. They've also agreed, as I understand it, to extend the Bury contract, so actually there can be adequate time can be given to assess the results of the consultation. The CCG have also agreed to host and attend 2 public meetings, one in Bury and one in Prestwich, so members of the public can come along and ask their questions about these reforms and ask questions about what's driving them and ask questions about the potential impacts. We, as a Labour group, are going to continue to campaign in a civilised manner to ensure that this decision, which was seemingly ratified at a board meeting a couple of weeks ago, is publicly scrutinised. And really, ultimately, it's members of the public who are going to be affected by this change. Over 7,000 people signed our petition against the closures. And what we will ensure, as best we can, is that as many people as possible get their say to really scrutinise these proposals. And I'm hopeful, and I would encourage as many people as possible to take part in the consultation. I'm hopeful, after hearing people's representations, the CCG will change their minds. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Shaw. Do you have a supplementary, Mr Baroda?
No, I don't. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. I now call on Anthony Baroda to ask the fifth question relating to CCG funding.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The CCG has claimed that the walk-in centre closures is not a money-saving exercise. But, Leader, can you confirm that the Bury CCG is still underfunded by the tune of £12 million?
Mr Shorey.
Thank you, Mr Baroda, for your question. By reference to the NHS England's own target allocation, the CCG is underfunded by about £10.9 million per year. But I don't think that really tells the whole story. Just like us as a local authority, every year they're commissioning services which is subject to more demand. So actually, on top of the gap, the funding gap of £10.9 million, year on year they're making efficiencies of about 5%, which in essence means there's less money in the pot to commission services. So they are under significant financial pressures. Now, they've come out and said, well, this isn't about saving money. OK. But notwithstanding that, the NHS in Bury is underfunded. We were one of the most poorly funded CCGs in the whole of the north of England, and that can't be acceptable because, as I can say from a social care point of view, Bury's got one of the fastest growing ageing populations in Greater Manchester. Obviously, there's that inextricable link between healthcare and social care. So both sides of the equation need to be properly funded so people in Bury get the best outcomes. They say this issue isn't driven by cost. That may be the case, but they certainly are under fundamental cost pressures which aren't sustainable. And we've written to the government, we're going to have a motion a bit later on, and we'll keep up the pressure to ensure that Bury CCG gets a fair deal.
Thanks, Councillor Shaw. Do you have a supplementary, Mr Barona?
I do, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Leader, for your answer. Obviously, I'm aware what the Clinical Commissioning Group does. What I wasn't aware is who's on it. I looked it up. What I'm interested in is how it's decided who serves on the CCG.
Councillor Shaw.
The CCG obviously has its own governance mechanisms. They're not linked to the council. I can get a full and detailed response to that question, so you're fully aware of how their board members are appointed.
Thanks, Councillor Shorey. I now call on Christopher Russell to ask the 6th question related to Bury's local plan.
Bury's draft local plan was rejected in 2015 on the basis that the provision for housing within it was insufficiently robust. The draft plan was withdrawn in its entirety rather than being refreshed, thus leaving Bury without an up-to-date local plan in place despite having had more than a decade to produce it under the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004. You stated at a public meeting on the 6th of January 2017 that Bury's planning authority would be put into special measures if Bury pulled out of the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. On the basis that Bury does not have an up-to-date local plan, what did you mean by the term special measures, and what are you doing to ensure that Bury's planning authority is not put into so-called special measures should the GMSF collapse, given that the government expects local plans to have been produced by March 2017?
Thanks, Mr Russell. Councillor Shorey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is a lengthy answer, but it's a complicated topic. Your reference that the council has had a decade to get an up-to-date plan in place seems to suggest that this council has not attempted to do so. The council has pushed hard to get our local plan updated, not once but twice. The first attempt to do so was in 2011 under the Conservative administration, and the latest attempt was in 2015. On both occasions, the proposed local plan sought to protect the borough's greenbelt, but on both occasions this was rejected by the government's appointed planning inspector. The fundamental issue on both these occasions was whether or not the borough's full housing needs were being planned for. The identified housing need for housing in the borough is around 600 dwellings per annum. This has broadly been the need in the borough over the last decade based on the government's household projections. However, this level of need cannot be met without releasing greenbelt land, and we argue this point without success in our draft local plan strategy. The key issue will continue to be the focus of debate as we try to get a plan in place, whether this is through the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework or our own local plan. The borough simply does not have enough land in the urban area to meet its housing and employment needs. The need for additional housing and employment will not simply go away as the borough's population increases, with a need for new jobs. Therefore, it is not just a case of refreshing or dusting down our previous attempts to get a plan in place that protects the current greenbelt. As I've already said, we have attempted to do this twice under the current legislation and national policy. So the prospects of a third attempt are very limited. The government is due to publish a housing and planning white paper, which I believe is going to be made available on the 16th of February, which will pave the way for changes to planning legislation and planning policy. We are eager to see what is in this white paper, as it gives the government the opportunity to remove all the ambiguity around whether Greenbelt should be released to meet local needs, or vice versa. As plans need to be in conformity with national planning policy, the government's intended approach will have considerable implications for both the GMSF and our local plan. I do not want to prejudge what the government will do, but as it stands, the GMSF is being processed in accordance with current national planning policy, which is putting pressure on local authorities to ensure that sufficient land is made available to meet needs. If, as some people are suggesting, this approach is not in line with the government's current policy, then the planning inspector will throw it out. Plans need to be in conformity with national planning guidance, and hence it cuts both ways. But in direct response to your question, this council, as with other Greater Manchester councils, will also be producing its own local plan. This was always the case, regardless of whether the GMSF was being produced or not. The initial stages of Bury's local plan started last year, and will be moving to the next stages during the course of 2017. The work on the GMSF and our own local plan should demonstrate to the government that we are trying to get a plan in place, in addition to our previous 2 attempts. If the GMSF process is stopped for whatever reason, then the council will continue to progress its local plan, but with the same inputs as the GMSF, because that is what the housing projections are, which is roughly 600 houses per annum. And so on that basis, our local plan will need to deal with the same key issues, including this tension of releasing Greenbelt to meet needs. Unless the government provides a clear steer on this Greenbelt issue, through changes to legislation and policy, then the threat to Bury's Greenbelt and Greenbelt right across the country will remain. We should all ask ourselves why the government is pushing authorities to get plans in place and setting tight deadlines to do so. It is their attempt to ensure that plans are in place up and down the country that release enough land to meet the government's target of 1 million new homes by 2020. For many local authorities across England, as in Bury, this can only be achieved through the release of Greenbelt land. The threat from government to intervene in local authorities that have not got an up-to-date plan in place is to ensure that authorities do not take an easy option and do nothing. Clearly, this is not the case in Bury, and will be easily able to demonstrate that we've tried and are continuing to try to get an up-to-date plan in place. I would like to think that we could legally resist any government intervention to impose a local plan on the people of Bury, given the efforts of this council over the years. Importantly, the type of plan that we eventually get in place will be very much dependent on whether or not current government planning policy changes.
Thanks, Councillor Short, for that very full and comprehensive answer. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
When you are updating your local plan, will you take into account the government's wishes to protect the Greenbelt and not to use it for houses, based on the 12,000 homes predicted for Bury? Are you questioning the figures from the ONS, especially the ridiculously low number of residents per house for Bury of 1.3, comparing to 2.3 for a national average? Are you going to involve the local community in the plans to come up with a better solution for all parties as per the government's wishes in the 2016 Act?
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Short.
Thank you very much for that question. I don't want to necessarily preempt what I'm going to say in terms of the debate that's going on later on, but you've referenced National Planning Policy Framework and local plans. And of course, you're quite right to say that the National Policy Planning Framework, or NPPF, talks about sort of almost prohibition of building on Greenbelt, except I think in exceptional circumstances. Well, before Christmas, there was a decision by the Secretary of State that allowed Birmingham City Council to have a plan which released land in Greenbelt to deliver 6,000 homes, and that was deemed to be an exceptional circumstance to meet housing need. So the point I'm making is, although that's what the government is saying, it's not matched by their actions, because they themselves have now set a legal precedent that actually you can build on Greenbelt, or you can release land which is currently in Greenbelt to meet housing need. And the tension there is between the National Planning Policy Framework and National Planning Policy Guidance, which means local authorities like ours have to meet housing need, which is why, as I say, it's not a political point, the Conservatives tried to put forward a plan which didn't release Greenbelt. We did as well in 2013. So we will do our best, but that is the conundrum that we face. Hopefully the Housing White Paper will remedy that conundrum. In terms of your point, and it's a very well-made point about ONS figures, there is this argument that somehow the GMSF has turbocharged the housing need. In 2011, household projections, which are provided by DCLG following input from the Office of National Statistics on population growth, it put Bury's housing need, I think, about 625 back in 2011. The GMSF puts that annual housing need at 625. But we have written to Gavin Barwell, who's the Housing Minister. We did that back in November. I've sent a chaser in January. I've written to David Nuttall MP, and you've referenced the public meeting on the 6th of January. I offered then to go with David on a non-political basis to actually talk to the Secretary of State, because it's still DCLG which signs off these figures, to actually say, do we need to look at them again, given the recent report from CPRE, which puts forward a lower figure in terms of household projections, and also we do need to fully understand the impacts of Brexit and so on and so forth. So I've done that, I've written to David Nuttall, I'm sure he's going to come back to me, but absolutely we should be challenging those figures. In terms of public engagement and involving communities, obviously this is the first draft of the GMSF. There will be a second consultation, there'll be a public inquiry and so on and so forth. So we'll do what we can to sort of maximise public engagement. But the key point is around the figures. The lower the figures in terms of population growth, the less land we'll need.
Thank you, Councillor Shorey. I call on James Mason to ask the 7th question relating to the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. Mr Mason.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Does the leader agree with Andy Burnham that the GMSF should be substantially rewritten?
Councillor Shorey.
Thank you very much for your question, Mr Mason. I've come out publicly and actually said that Andy Burnham has made some very, very sensible proposals linked to the points I've made around housing growth. We've just gone through the first consultation. A number of stakeholders have put forward issues around levels of growth that are anticipated and whether or not they are actually realistic. And I agree with a lot of what Andy Burnham has said, particularly his focus around rejuvenating town centres, existing town centres, to turn them into vibrant places for people to live. And I can tell you, Andy Burnham is actually using Bury and The Rock as a good example of that, which is mixed high-quality retail with rented accommodation to meet a housing need. And I would certainly support that across all the other parts of Bury as well, so we can actually meet housing need without necessarily going into other areas. This issue about a substantial redraft, he has said he thinks too much Greenbelt is being given away for this process. I'm quite happy to support his analysis on this, and actually that's why I've said and consistently said after the mayoral election we will be in a better position to see how the GMSF is actually going to progress, because he is a statutory power in relation to the plan from a strategic point of view. And if that's the direction of travel that he wants to move in, I think Bury, with Andy Burnham, if he is the mayor, will probably be in a better position to challenge government around national policy and population growth forecasts than Bury doing it alone with our own local plan.
Thanks, Councillor Shorey. Do you have a supplementary, Mr Mason?
I do, sir. Mr Shorey, could we not take less industrial space and take the pressure off the Greenbelt for housing? Thank you.
Mr Shorey.
Apologise for just getting a sip of water. We will certainly look at that as part of the consultation, and that is actually a suggestion that's been put forward in the GMSF in various different areas. But I think this process of the GMSF has been talked about being all about Greenbelt and all about housing, but it's as much about employment growth as it is about housing, about giving people jobs and so on and so forth. I see on average 2 businesses a week in Bury, and some of the bigger ones, like Tetrasil, Polyfloor, so on and so forth, they are expanding at a rate of knots because they are world leaders. They're not just national champions, they have a huge export market. And there is nowhere else in Bury, in terms of an employment perspective, where they can go. So, for example, actually, we lost the head office to Tetrasil to Rochdale. And I think the point is, we can't have our cake and eat it. I want to, when I became leader of the council, we should prioritise brownfield development. But if you're for housing, but if you're going to prioritise all existing former brownfield for housing, then where is the space for employment growth? Where are new businesses going to go if you've used up all the existing brownfield land? And I think that is the point. So you can certainly look at moderating it, but we do need more employment land. And they make the point, about 50% of Bury's population out-commutes. 50% still live and work in Bury, and they will need good quality jobs. What you don't want is for those companies to relocate, because a lot of them make a big play of the fact that they employ Bury people and they enjoy employing Bury people because they've been in this borough for 50 years or so. We don't want to lose that. We don't want to throw the baby out of the bathwater. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Shorey. I call on Keith Fenton to ask the 8th question relating to 6 town housing waiting lists.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. How many people are currently on the 6 towns housing waiting list? And if possible, can those figures be split by those currently not rehoused by 6 town housing and those seeking a transfer within 6 town housing? Thank you.
Councillor Shorey.
I don't know if this is going to answer your question in entirety, but the council currently operates the housing register, and there are 1,452 applicants on the housing register, of which 1,166 are general applicants, and the others are downsizers, transfers or mutual exchanges.
Thanks, Councillor Shorey. Do you have a supplementary, Mr. Fenton?
No, thank you.
Thank you. That does bring us to the end of public question time. We've had actually longer than half an hour, so we have no time for verbal ones, but I think you'll agree with me that you've had very full and comprehensive answers to the written questions that we've had. So I am going to move on now to the next item on the agenda. Councillor.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, with your permission, I'm not quite sure what procedural motion I should be moving. It's just there are a lot of people in the public gallery who are interested in the NHS and the spatial framework, and I wondered whether members would consider a change to the order of the agenda to take all 3 notices of motion in the order that they are presented immediately after the leader's statement, rather than after all our questions.
Thanks, Councillor Pickstone. Do we have a seconder for that proposal?
I'm happy to second that.
Thank you. All those in favour? There is a precedent with that. We did that with the fracking debate in view of the number of people that were in the public gallery. So thank you for that, Councillor Pickstone.
Sorry, would it be actually easier if we move to the motions now, before the leader's statement, so people don't have to sit through my statement? We can start with the motions. I'm quite happy to do that if you're happy to second that.
I'm sure your statement's of interest to everybody, Councillor Shorey. What are members' views? Aye. Move to the notice of motion. Happy with that? Okay. Got the wrong page then. I nearly called on Councillor Bailey to move his report. Could I make members aware of copies of procedure rules 14.12 point of order and 14.13 point of explanation been put around the chamber to assist proceedings. With regard to 14.13, the rule exists to allow a member to interrupt the debate to correct a misstatement or a misquote. Could I ask you to just show some respect with that and not be jumping up and down every 2 minutes as we have in the past? It's got to be a genuine misstatement or a genuine misquote, or I will not allow it. A notice of motion concerning an elections pilot scheme has been received from the councillors listed in the council summons. The details of the motion are set out in the summons, and I call on Councillor Caserta to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In order to save time, and I know that's your bugbear, Mr. Mayor, I don't propose to recite chapter and verse of the report, which I hopefully that the members have actually had a chance to read, called Securing the Ballot. which was mainly instigated in response to some of the outrageous actions at Tower Hamlets earlier on last year. Fellow councillors, I brought this motion to us tonight, mainly sponsored by the Conservative Party, but hopefully it will receive approval throughout the members. At this point, normally during my speech, I would have probably spent 10 minutes castigating the Labour Party about all their misdemeanours, and the Liberal Party, of course, because the Conservative parties never do anything wrong. Well, we all know that's bumpkin, for want of a better word. Nobody can actually claim the moral high ground in this situation. All parties have been aware and have abused the system over the years. None of us have got clean hands on this matter. We all know that every episode in the past is magnified and embellished by the voting public, and we've all seen it at the doors when we've knocked on the doors. I don't vote because all of them politicians are crooks and the voting system is fixed anyway. So we've all had it, and as I say, one of the things that brought this report to a head is the Tower Hamlets debacle. So Eric Pickles, or Sir Eric Pickles, was commissioned by David Cameron to understand how or if the system of voter impersonation and postal votes was open to fraud. Something that most members here have had an idea about for years now, but central government are always behind the provinces. So he took his time over the reports. As you probably know, it took him over 18 months. I think David Cameron had set him 6 months to do it. And hopefully, in my opinion, it doesn't go far enough, but that's a matter of opinion. Sir Eric found that the potential for fraudsters to commit impersonation and other electoral offences at polling stations leaves our electoral system at risk of abuse. Organisations like the Electoral Commission and the Organisation for Cooperation in Europe, when monitoring UK elections, have called for the introduction of ID in polling stations. Northern Ireland has had this in place since 2003, and it is required in other countries such as Canada and the Netherlands. These changes would be about creating a fairer society and also tackling the perceptions, as I mentioned, of fraud, which in themselves impact upon people's willingness not to participate in the vote. These changes will help to eliminate the potential for fraud and improper practices, which we should all believe are unacceptable at any level. It is recognised that there is a need to introduce any such change in a considered fashion and without adverse effect on legitimate electors. Consequently, the government will be looking to run a number of voter identification pilot schemes at local government elections in 2018 to test the impact of asking voters to present a form of ID before they can receive their ballot paper. And as you're probably aware, the government have now listed 18 councils who they have been advised by the Electoral Commission are considered most at risk to voter fraud. But they have said that it is important that the assessment of the impact of the introduction of voter identification measures, I'll read that again, that the assessment of the impact of the introduction of voter identification measures gives an accurate picture of voter experiences from across the country. They will therefore also intend to invite applications to participate in pilot schemes from local authorities where electoral fraud has not been identified as a risk. This will provide them with an opportunity to test the impact of voter identification measures outside of areas with specific electoral integrity issues. And this is the aim of the motion tonight. For council members, basically, excuse me because I've had the sniffles all day, for council members to give the authority to our officers to apply on Bury's behalf. The ultimate aim is to identify a means to shut off an avenue of fraud, long held up as vulnerable by critics, and to stop illegitimate votes undermining legitimate voters. Some of the proposals to be trialled within the pilot would be to increase the powers of returning officers and the police to control unwanted behaviour around polling stations and increase the area covered by this control. To lower the test for intimidation and to establish a more clearly defined definition of undue influence. Political campaigners and activists would be banned completely from handling postal ballots. The right to a permanent postal vote would be removed and a maximum of 3 years imposed on any application. And finally, the main proposal is for voter identification. This would require some form of voter identification. Now, the government are aware that not everybody has a passport, driver's licence or bus pass, and is also considering the provision for credit cards to confirm signatures as an option or an up-to-date council tax or utility invoice. Basically, what this pilot will do is attempt to ensure that voters are safeguarded against intimidation by activists and political campaigners when they attend polling stations. It will seek to end the harvesting of postal votes by political supporters, and it will give careful consideration to using data to prevent fraudulent electoral activity. Members, by approving this motion tonight, you will be sending a signal to the Bury electorate that this council takes voter fraud seriously and providing proof as a council of our deep-held belief in our democratic system. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Caserta. Councillor Gartside, are you going to second?
Yes, much pleasure seconding Mr. Mayor, and reserve my right to speak.
Thanks, Councillor Gartside. Members, any comments? Any other speeches? Councillor Pickstone and then Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We will be supporting this motion. I think all of us will agree that it's very important that our democratic process is robust, and over history that democratic process has been renewed, I suppose, as society moves on. And I think the ability to just turn up to a polling station and say, I am whoever, without any checks whatsoever, is something that might have worked in the past but is not appropriate now. So we do agree with this. Our main concern, as Councillor Caserta stated, is that I think it's very important that asking for ID doesn't exclude people. So the absolute maximum possible options for ID would need to be in place, because you know, not everybody has a credit card if they don't have a passport and a driving licence. So the absolute maximum form of ID to not exclude people. I don't think we should shy away from trying to have a robust system in doing that. I do have one query, I suppose, to the motion, which is the suggestion that if the government didn't want Bury to be an additional pilot area, then we should run it ourselves. And I'm not sure whether we can just change electoral law ourselves like that. I suspect not. But perhaps the movers of the motions can clarify that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Pitts. Councillor Roy Walker.
Just briefly, Mr. Mayor, could I add a couple of points to this? I think, obviously, as supporting the motion, I think it's something we've needed for some years. One thing, though, I would criticise, and it may be something legal that the council is required to say now, but is the poll card you get to go along to vote. It now says you don't need to take this with you to the polling station. And a lot of people are confused by that and don't bring it, don't think they should take it, as if they're being told not to take it. I would have thought it should say it would be helpful if you took this with you, not just for people outside the school or wherever who ask them their voting number, but for themselves, because when they take it in, that could be stamped. And then you take it home. I've got all mine going back decades. You take it home with you as a souvenir. But it's stamped. You can't turn up again to vote at that address as Mr. Roy Walker because you haven't got the polling card, it's with somebody else and it's been stamped. I just think that's something we could think about as a council. Why do we say people don't need to take that? The second point I make, postal votes, it's been a bugbear of mine for many years. I go back long enough, sorry to keep going back, but I go back when you used to rush round to the GP to get them to sign that somebody was very ill, some elderly lady was, you know, in a bed, very ill, genuinely. Somebody had gone in hospital, and they would sign to say they could have a postal vote. Similarly, if someone could show evidence they're away abroad on business, they could get a postal vote. Then there seems to be a trend, not just from this council, not just from the government, everybody seems to be making it that people don't have to go along to the polling station. Those sites of people in South Africa queuing all night to go and vote, most of us saw when it got a universal franchise, were very moving indeed. I think they've all just sent a postal vote in. It wouldn't have been as dramatic at all. But we seem to be saying to people, don't bother going on to vote, just do a postal vote. And I wonder whether we've made it too easy. And I've seen people in this town in the last 10 years collecting them from houses and going with wads that thick to bring them in here, whether it's from Red Vales, Radcliffe, wherever it's from. I'm not naming any one individual, but I've seen people bringing them in, loads of them, into the black box in the reception here. Now, I don't know what's happened. It may be these people can't bring their own in or post it or anything, but it seems wrong to me that individuals can bring in loads of postal votes from people. So I think that does need looking at, as well as whether we're being too liberal, with the use of postal votes, and it should be an exception, and the rule should be, where you possibly can, you turn up to exercise your vote along with your fellow citizens. There seems to be something about a lot of people, they don't like going on buses, they don't like mixing with people, they live on their own and they live very singular lives. And I think meeting people at the polling station is, like at the outpatients, is one of those nice things in life where you mix with fellow citizens. Anyway, I'll leave it there. But those are just 2 points. Otherwise, I think Councillor Caserta did sum it up very well, spoke very well, and I agree with his motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. Any other speakers? Councillor James.
In this day and age, we should be trying to increase the franchise as much as possible to get more people involved in voting. And my real concern is that this is looking at ways of restricting voting, particularly where we have had changes to the electoral registration system, which have meant that thousands, indeed millions of people have been excluded or persuaded or just pushed out of the register. So that is one concern, that what we're doing is perhaps restricting access to voting. In addition, we have now the changes to the boundaries, which is going to take place or may take place. And again, the whole communities are being changed, people are being moved around. And my concern is that this seems like a great idea. The motion seems a good idea. Councillor Caserta started off by saying nobody's perfect. Obviously, he misunderstands that the Labour group is perfect, but apart from that, I agree with him, nobody else is perfect. But it seems like a good idea. However, there are real concerns here, and my main concern is not to restrict the franchise to the wider public. Of course, we need to get young people involved, we need to get everybody involved in voting and having their say, and restricting it excessively is going to badly affect that. Of course, I'll leave other speakers to address those issues in due course, but I just wanted to make that particular point.
Thanks, Councillor James. Any other speakers? Wait for it, Councillor Gartside, you're too keen. Any other speakers? No? Councillor Gartside, you only use your right to second.
Yeah, I reserved my right to speak earlier, Mr Mayor. Congratulate Councillor Caserta on an excellent motion to Council, which does intend to enrich our democratic process in Bury. Councillor Pickstone mentioned a concern in relation to the legalities of us potentially putting our own system in place. Having stood in parliamentary elections outside of the borough and observed the way in which elections are run in different authorities, there are differences that I've noticed. Each individual local authority, to my mind, runs elections in different ways. some in some vastly different ways in relation to things like, for example, whether candidates are allowed to enter polling stations with a rosette on or not. Some authorities allow that, some don't. So I don't think that there is any legal problem with that. In relation to Councillor James's comments, I do disagree with his view that he thinks it would substantially reduce people's willingness to go and vote. I think in this day and age of identity theft and everything, I think people would actually feel more reassured that there are proper processes in place, and I don't think the majority of people would be put off by just having the inconvenience of just taking an electricity bill or a passport if they have one down to the polling station. I really don't see that, Councillor James. So congratulations to Councillor Caserta on an excellent motion, and I hope that all council can support it. We can get these increased regulations put in place to basically make our borough safer around election time, and I hope council can support that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Gartside. Are there any amendments? No, you're too late now, Councillor Harris. I'm sorry, I gave you plenty of time, plenty of opportunity. Councillor Walmsley.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move an amendment on behalf of the Labour Group, and the amendment has been circulated to all members at the start of the meeting.
Carry on, Councillor Walmsley.
Okay. So in moving the amendment on behalf of the Labour Group, I want to explain why we're proposing the changes that we are. Firstly, the Conservative motion refers to the review carried out by Eric Pickles, yet it doesn't reference the government response to this in December last year. I think it's fair to say that in all matters debated in the Council chamber, it's important to comment using the most up-to-date and accurate information, hence our addition of this at the start of the amendment. In addition, you're suggesting that we welcome both the review and the 50 recommendations contained within it. It is difficult to welcome anything that is still subject to a parliamentary process, in this case, most likely through a programme of works, until such a review is finalised and accepted through the parliamentary processes. More importantly, however, we find it difficult to welcome recommendations that refer specifically to nationality, language spoken in a polling station, and the imposition of photo ID. And Councillor James's point referenced this. We believe this seeks to disenfranchise large swathes of voters from participating in the electoral process. We know, for example, that many young people and people on low incomes are more likely to not hold photo ID or be in a position to be able to obtain it for financial reasons. Who'd want to spend hard-earned wages on an expensive passport, and they are expensive these days, when you've mouths to feed at home? And that's a real-life scenario for many of our residents in Bury, and one that we need to consider carefully. And I note Councillor Pickstone's comments on maximum ID being suitable to be provided. But the Conservative motion is very clear. It says under item A, photo ID. Councillor Walker makes a good point actually about the poll cards being used, and maybe that's the starting point, is mandatory use of the poll cards that are already issued as part of the electoral registration process. I don't agree, however, with Councillor Gartside's point suggesting that this will somehow enrich the electoral process. You referred there to, there not being a problem with voters producing an electricity bill at the polling station for proof of ID. Again, I refer you to your own motion that says specifically photo ID. The motion fails to recognise the changes that were made to the electoral registration process that saw 1 million people drop off the register. These changes made the process more robust than before, with voters requiring national insurance details and passport details if they lived abroad. And to the point around the point that Councillor Walker mentions around postal votes, I would encourage any member in this council chamber to report any suspicious activity directly to the returning officer so that that can be investigated. Quite why, therefore, you would need to prove nationality remains to be seen. However, this and many of the other recommendations contained in the review will need to be thrashed out through the parliamentary process and not in this council chamber. We do accept that there have been some issues outside of Bury with allegations of electoral fraud, and we accept that reform needs to take place. Bury is not a high-risk area. We've not had complaints of electoral fraud that have been investigated in recent years, and we've not had any investigations that have led to criminal convictions. Nonetheless, I think we could all provide examples, as Councillor Walker has, of activity that goes on in and around polling stations that is inappropriate on polling day. The Labour group firmly believes in democracy and the right of every individual to vote freely without fear of provocation or intimidation. Finally, just to make the point on the pilot scheme, it's not clear from the review what funding allocations, if any, will be made available to authorities participating in such pilot schemes, or indeed the costs associated with running our own pilot scheme. As Bury is not a high-risk area, we do not feel at this point there would be benefit to residents in participating in a pilot, especially with no additional funding against a backdrop of savage cuts already to our budget. We are keen to see the results of the pilots that are being held in the high-risk areas at the next local elections in 2018 and what alterations are made to the recommendations ahead of their implementation by Parliament. And with that, Mr Mayor, that's why we're making the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker and Walmsley. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Parnell. Thank you. Are there any other speakers on the amendment? Councillor Quinn.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I certainly think this amendment we put forward does have some merit. On A and B, I think political parties, for example, shouldn't leave election literature within the vicinity of the polling station. I don't think political parties should lobby people within the vicinity of the polling station. And I think, as it's your vote, you should be left, when you do get your ballot paper, to go from the staff to the polling booth on your own, because it's your vote. Now, obviously, if people are disabled, have special needs, and they're accompanied, but you don't, it's your vote. So they should be able to do that. So, and why not? I mean, we need funding for this, Mr Mayor. I believe in the old days we used to have a policeman at each polling. Well, I would be against that if we had the police to do it, and as Councillor Long said, if we had the funding to do it. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Quinn. Any other speakers on the amendment? Councillor Gartside and then Councillor Harris, because you missed it last time.
Yeah, Mr Mayor, I mean, we'll be opposing this amendment, which basically doesn't do or say anything. I think Councillor Walmsley, you're very cleverly trying to sort of say that, you know, I don't know the wording of my own motion. What you failed to say, Councillor Walmsley, is the last line of our motion, which says, or run its own pilot scheme at the next local government elections. So when I mention electricity bills, that could be what we want in our pilot, but surely to goodness, actually tightening it up, maybe not a full photo ID system, you know, surely it would improve the situation, even if it isn't to the extent that's been suggested in the parliamentary pilot scheme. So this motion basically doesn't do anything. All I would say, Mr Mayor, is that if anything does untoward happen between now and the elections in 2018, and we had the opportunity right here, right now in this council, to put some extra safeguards in place, and we've only got ourselves to blame. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Harris.
Thank you. Yes, just an interesting point. I think the motion, as it stands, the way we proposed it, is right. Just a point about the photo ID that is suggested here, which Councillor Walmsley would say some people do not have. I just actually went to the post office to pick up a parcel and I had to produce photo ID. Very often you do have to produce photo ID. I'm not in favour of identity cards, but there are times when you do have to produce photo IDs. If you are voting, it is a very serious legal duty, and I think that any safeguards, certainly not to dissuade people from voting, because as a politician, as we knock on doors and they say, I'm not interested in voting, I don't believe in it. I find that very frustrating. I think we must encourage people to vote, but at the same time we have to have a robust system. I cannot see why it is wrong to ask for photo IDs if it has to be. If you are a citizen, you have to have some kind of identity if you try to open a bank account or anything. So I would like to stick with this, our original motion, and against the amendment, because it waters it down. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Any other speakers? And Councillor Jones.
Mr Mayor, I'm grateful. I'm amazed that we're trying to fix something that isn't broken in Bury. We've got so many other things in this borough that you could be concentrating your efforts on. I spent 34 years in the police service, a good 20 of those as a senior officer, and on about 4 occasions only in that entire length of service was a complaint ever made to me of parliamentary or local election impropriety. And on each and every occasion, it was to do with politicians falling out with politicians. There was never any impropriety. It doesn't happen in Bury. Can I suggest, Councillor Caserta, that your pilot area is left to an area of the country where those irregularities are far more common, and that will give you a much better database on which to act and propose legislation. Bury doesn't need this at the moment. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Fitzgerald, and then Councillor Roy Walker, and then I'm going to bring it to a halt.
I just wanted to bring to attention that the Labour amendment actually says within it retain. The review also advises that systems of voter ID at polling stations should be piloted. So at the moment we're not actually saying there should be no photo ID. We're just flagging up that there is a concern that if the type of ID that's required is too high, for example, I'm using some voter ID here, you know, it is my picture of me and I can have a credit card and that might work and that might work. So we're concerned about those issues about it. But I also think it is important to stress the things that we said before, that we're picking in this, in that original amendment, some of the things that we want to take from other people's systems. So, for example, all places use voter ID, but in America they actually have a system where if you've not been able to get on because you've moved recently and things like that, you can actually get on the voter register very late up to it with your address and with everything else. You can even go almost on the day and still be able to. So what my concern about this is that we're actually chopping off the opportunities for people to vote by taking the elements that we want from different people's systems and wanting to put it in. And to quote someone who's better approached than me on this, and sort of referencing Councillor Jones's point as well, which is in Bury, we don't need an investigation into voter fraud, but an investigation into voter suppression. So I'd like to thank Mr Sanders in America for that quote. But I know personally that in my ward, Bess's, we saw a huge number of people drop off the register for the last time. And I think if we're actually talking about access to democracy, which is what we want, nobody in here wants voter fraud. But what we really need to be doing is looking at why people aren't voting in the first place. And instead of having motions that have references to people having to speak English, actually saying we want everyone in this country who's entitled to vote to actually to be able to vote. So how do we make sure that, you know, if people don't understand what the system is, that there's a translator there who's actually able to help them do it, rather than people thinking that there's, I don't know, great hordes of people who might be doing something wrong in the voting station because they don't speak the same language as them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, Councillor Walker, and you're the last speaker.
Thank you. Very briefly on the amendment, I think there's a bit of complacency coming across from Councillor Jones and from Councillor Walmsley. The idea that we've no problems at all in Bury. Just mention one thing. The returning officer, when I was up for election about 9 years ago, briefed us all, candidates and agents, that nobody, no candidate or agent should touch anybody else's postal vote. I can remember asking, well, what about my wife's? Can I take that in? And we're told, perhaps you're right, but generally you can't. When I was up 4 years later, there was no mention of this, and I asked, and they said, oh, we're not saying anything about that this time. It had got dropped. Now, I assure you, I have seen people taking lots of postal votes into the town hall from parts of this town in elections. I assure you. Now, that I don't think anybody feels really that's the right thing to do. So, I think we have potential problems, but do we have to wait to somebody going to prison? In all three parties, people have gone to prison for malpractice in election. God knows why. A local election, I agree with somebody who said we're trying to get people to vote in them. Why some people value that vote so much they're prepared to go to prison to get their votes rigged, I don't know, because there's a lot of complacency in local elections, and we think we do well if we get 40-odd% turnout. But some have gone to prison from Manchester and Oldham, around here, only down the road. So I'm saying we want to do something about it, or Councillor Cassard does, before we have a problem. I think Councillor Jones, because he hadn't come across many problems on this, don't think we should... Well, I thought he said 4. Anyway, he said he had complaints to him as a policeman between people. Can I just say one last thing? I think Councillor Quinn said no, he didn't believe in any candidates or agents being outside the polling stations. Well, I've known Labour Party, who we've now learned to perfect, often having people outside polling stations taking numbers and influencing voters. I must have dreamt it. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Parnell, you reserve your right to speak.
Pilot schemes are expensive. They are. To run a pilot scheme will cost us money, and we're all well aware of what's happening with our budgets recently. Councillor Gartside, when he speaks about, you know, on one occasion you can take your photo ID, on another occasion you can take your lecky bill, you know. We could be, not let everybody's got electric bill, some people use electric cars. A lot of you, I'm sorry, I didn't realise.
No, we don't need any interruptions, Councillor Gartside.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A lot of you people that I grew up with many moons ago, they don't have, they leave care, they don't have photo ID. None of them have it at all. And they struggle for the rest of their life to get it. So this would just disenfranchise people further from not being able to vote. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Parnell. Councillor Walmsley, your opportunity to sum up.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just to respond to some of the comments that have been made. First of all, in response to Councillor Gartside, who said that our amendment doesn't do or say anything. Well, it does. It deletes 2 of your suggestions and replaces them with things that we believe are issues in this borough. And you've heard some of the examples about intimidation and other things that go on in and around polling stations. Your reference to electricity bills, great saying it in a speech, but I refer you back to your own motion. It doesn't say anywhere in there, in relation to the pilot or otherwise, about providing electricity bills. It says photo ID being requested by voters and proxy voters. It doesn't say anything about electricity bills. Councillor Harris's point about Royal Mail and proof of ID and the fact that she went and produced photo ID. I must declare an interest, Mr Mayor, because as you know I work for the Communication Workers Union that represent members in the Royal Mail, so I know all too well what the procedures are for collecting parcels. And in fact, if you produced photo ID, that was over and above the minimum requirement, which is proof of address. So Royal Mail doesn't require that. And you said that you wanted to encourage people to vote and that you didn't see what the problem was in people providing photo ID. Well, can I suggest that you visit some of the areas in East Bury, some of the families that we represent in East Red Vales and Moorside, where we have low-income families that, you know, don't have photo ID and can barely afford to feed their families, never mind purchase, as I referenced in the moving speech, expensive forms of ID such as passports. Councillor Fitzgerald's point about voter suppression, absolutely right, big issue. You'll recall the Labour group motion last year, I think, that was carried in which we proposed that we extend voting rights to those aged 16 and 17. That's a positive, productive way in which we think that people can be engaged in the electoral voting system. And finally, Councillor Walker's point on there, quote, being no problems in Bury. I don't think we said that. I think myself, Councillor Jones and others have referenced the fact that there are problems, and we acknowledge that. I think what the point is, Bury is not a high-risk area for electoral fraud, and you know that's one of the reasons why we don't think at this stage we'd benefit from what would be a costly process. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walmsley. Councillor Caserta, you have the right to reply, and this is your last opportunity to speak on the motion. In that case, then, we move to the vote on the amendment as moved by Councillor Walmsley and, sorry, nearly slipped down there, moved by Councillor Walmsley and seconded by Councillor Parnell. All those in favour of the amendment, please stand. All those against? Are there any abstentions? The amendment is carried. The amendment therefore becomes a substantive motion, and we move on to vote on the substantive motion. So all those in favour of the substantive motion as amended, please show. All those against? Any abstentions? The motion as amended is carried. A notice of motion concerning the NHS has been received from the councillors listed in the summons. The details of the motion are set out in the summons, and I call on Councillor Parnell to move the motion.
Mr Mayor, thank you. Members of the Council, I'm pleased that the Labour Group is bringing this motion before you today. But I'm sorry to say that our National Health Service, the very essence of our identity, has been on life support since 2010. We've seen in the past weeks what is planned for our NHS, what this government plans for our residents, or should I say what this government has cut, or is in the process of cutting for our residents. This is why we, Labour, are bringing this motion before Council tonight, to highlight beyond these four walls what the Conservative government is doing to our NHS. You're going to hear the opposition when they get to their feet, of course, with the crib sheet from kindly provided to them by Conservative Party headquarters, probably outlining their amazing achievements. But let's not forget as well, at some point you might hear the massive debt that the Labour government left behind. Even though the Conservative government has managed to spend in the past 7 years more than what we, the Labour Party, did in 13 years, raising the debt even higher. They'll have their lines prepared, scripts ready, and they will dispense with you dutifully and shortly. You may also hear, as we did at the last council meeting, talk about the outgoing former Treasury to the Secretary, Liam Byrne, and his note saying there was no money left, quoted by one of the councillors opposite. Now, as a citizen of the UK, that is fine with me. I'm more than happy to hear all the money's gone. I dutifully pay my taxes every month, whilst large corporations pay nothing. I pay what I believe is my fair share. Now, I say this because I don't expect my taxes to be kept in safe, locked away. I expect them to be used. I don't expect them to prop up the banks, but they have been. And I don't expect them to sort out bankers' bonuses, but they are doing. We're well aware that people are not the priority for this Conservative government, but profit is. I expect my taxes, like Liam Byrne said, to be spent. I expect my taxes to be spent on our NHS, our police force, the fire service, the army, the navy. All of these have been cut as well. So where has the money gone? You may well hear PFI mentioned, and I do hope so, because living in North Manchester during the 80s, I've seen firsthand what Conservative government did to the Mancunians there and to the NHS there. Crumpsall Hospital, known as North Manchester General Hospital, started life as a workhouse. It looked like a workhouse after 13 years of Thatcher and Major. The scale of the investment needed then, nod your heads all you want, I was there. The scale of the investments needed was massive, and thanks to the Labour government, they invested in North Manchester, and it was rebuilt, virtually rebuilt. One of many up and down the country rebuilt on a needs basis. Not the way your residents voted. It's not a lot to ask people to allow people to be born and to live and to work and to die in reasonable surroundings with simple humanitarian basics with a bit of dignity. We heard last week that the Prime Minister, Chairman May, goes off to meet President Dunk, and on her wish list was how she could get a good, fair trade deal for the UK, badly needed, presumably, after the Brexit bottle. The top of her list was how she can get 30 pieces of silver for the NHS with the large American corporations waiting in the wings. Badly needed. TTIP was an insidious deal completed behind closed doors, but May will slide it in via a state-sponsored trip to see Uncle Donald. The fallout will fall on our residents' shoulders. That's what you put a smile on few people's faces. But thankfully, we've had, in fairness, we haven't had such a bad winter. But we're still hearing about ambulances queuing up outside A&E, unable to dispatch their patients, horrendous waiting times, elderly people waiting on stretchers in corridors, people dying with no dignity or privacy in corridors. The Red Cross is calling it a humanitarian crisis. The Red Cross, a vastly respected international organisation, and the Prime Minister tries to blame doctors for not being flexible for opening times. And as for the Minister Hunt, and that's the polite way of putting it, he is shocking, and the shocking way he's handled the junior doctors dispute shows nothing but contempt for our NHS staff, saying they should work 7 days a week when they already do work 7 days a week. Propaganda, I believe it's called fake news, is the new term, trying to show how tough they can be, picking on the very people we need the most. When a family member hears the crushing words, it's cancer, the last thing they want to hear is, well, that all depends on the budget analysis. Or maybe we could use a specific drug. It may give you a few more years. It may help you. But sorry, that drug has been taken off the NHS because the government deems it too expensive. Patients being refused life-saving medication treatment. Knee and hip surgery being cancelled, hundreds of thousands of elderly people needlessly suffering in pain whilst they wait for operations because the care is being rationed by the NHS. Leading doctors are warned this is senseless and will lead to healthy people becoming immobile, becoming prisoners in their own home. Now, these are not my words. This is a statement from the Royal College of Surgeons, a well-respected part of the medical profession. The waiting list for the hip, knee and other orthopaedic operations has risen a quarter over the past 8 years to more than 500,000. Speaking to health professionals and doctors and nurses, they say they are beyond breaking point. One nurse explained that she had 24 patients to look after in one shift. She stated that the cuts are leading to premature deaths. In Germany, patients to nurses ratio is 13%. Sweden is 12.8%. But in England, it's 8.2% of nurses to every 1,000 patients. Now, they don't ask if you're Labour or Conservative when you go into A&E, thankfully. But the reality of the postcode lottery simply means that if you do live in the leafy suburb of Surrey compared to Salford, you'll be seen much quicker and you'll have a far greater range of treatment at your disposal. Accident emergency units in England have missed the official waiting time and targets over the past 3 months by the biggest margin for a decade. It's time to stop blaming the previous Labour government. It's time to fund our NHS. undertake what is in this motion. There's 6 points in this motion, this is what we're asking to do. We will be writing on behalf of our residents as a council to the Prime Minister, to the Health Secretary, asking, saying, demanding that Bury residents deserve better. Now, it's always nice to finish with a quote or two. The first is a shining example of the betrayal to the electorate. And it says, the choice of voters in Bury North is clear. Vote Labour and its services will be axed from Fairfield. Vote Conservative, and if there is a Conservative government, the maternity department will be kept open. No more babies in Bury. The second from a politician who did lie to the electorate. And his description of the party opposite when he addressed the people of Manchester, I wholeheartedly agree with. And he says, the NHS will last as long as there are folk left with the faith to fight for it. Blessed Welshman, my baby. And it's time for us to fight for it, to put aside whatever, because your party is selling off by the fistful. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Parnell. Councillor Hall, to second the motion.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Great pleasure in seconding the notice motion from Councillor Parnell. It was a very passionate and eloquent speech, and I'm delighted to second it. I don't think I've had many conversations over the last couple of years, or even longer, where we didn't get around to talking about the NHS. Everybody's talking about it. It seems that everyone, possibly with the exception of the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State of Health, realises there's a crisis, because there is. I was at a meeting the other day, Mr Mayor, when somebody said, well, of course we all value the NHS, don't we, because we were all born and will die under it. In my case, and perhaps some other people in the Council Chamber, that's not actually true. I was born in 1944, there was no NHS then. And I often wonder how much my mum paid to have to take me home. If it was like 50 bob, I guess she didn't get that much of a bargain. But I'm not dead yet. But the way this is going, quite seriously, the way this is going, there won't be an NHS when I die to bury me. Some people are in denial about it. It does seem as if certain leading politicians are denying there is a crisis, and clearly there is. I don't see anybody can walk about the town, go and visit the A&E, go and visit your doctor's surgery, the walk-in centres, wherever you go. There is a crisis. There are some massive problems, Mr Mayor, in recruitment and retention of nurses. Absolutely big, big problems. There are 2,000 vacant nurses, 24,000 vacant nursing posts nationally. 2,000 of those are in the northwest. Massive recruitment problem, and for doctors for that matter. The government announced they're going to do with a bursary for would-be nurses. That hasn't helped at all either. The 1% pay cap for medical staff, for nurses in particular, has meant some people are reassessing whether they can continue working in the NHS. Why would you want to work in the NHS and run it? It certainly wouldn't be for the money, would it? Some of the enthusiastic Brexiteers across the Council Chamber might be interested to know that there are around 2,000 nurses working in the region who will be potentially affected if when Brexit happens. We do rely greatly, and everybody must know this, on people not only from the EU countries, but from other parts of the world as well. Our hospitals, our NHS, and our care homes would not survive if it were not for people coming from other countries. The stress on nurses and doctors has to be seen to be believed. If you've not seen that, then you haven't seen anything. Suicide rates, alcoholism, mental health problems among GPs is through the roof. Another thing people don't want to be is a GP anymore, and why on earth should they? I think when Jeremy Hunt came on television, Mr Mayor, he was very patronising, and he was very complacent. Councillor Walker's used the word complacent, and I did look it up in my dictionary, but he'll know what it means, and so do I. So he said he wanted to thank staff for their Herculean efforts over Christmas. What he chose to ignore, or perhaps didn't realise, the toll on people's health and well-being, the staff's health and well-being, that took to provide those services under incredible pressure. I thought, Mr Mayor, when I was growing up, there was always talk about junior hospital doctors working long hours. That was taken for normal. I thought those days were gone. Clearly not. Doctors are working themselves to a standstill. They're doing double shifts, triple shifts, shifts all over the place. And it can't go on, Mr. Mayor. I really just want to finish, Mr. Mayor, saying this notice of motion urges us to write to the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State for Health to ask them to look at what's going on, recognise the crisis we've got, and do something about it. I think we have a duty to do it. Some harsh words about the government in this notice of motion, but try and put that aside. Think about what's going on. Use your own experiences. You go to A&E tomorrow or try and get a doctor's appointment, and it's not a nice experience. So I think we have a duty to support this notice of motion, and I'd urge you all to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Hull. Are there any speakers? Councillor Walker, then Councillor Quinn, then Councillor Harris.
Right, NHS, political football par excellence, to and fro. I noticed, though, one thing I thought was very unprofessional this week. The Silverdale Medical Centre has attacked the NHS in Bury. And that medical centre is actually in Salford City. And I thought to write attacking also the Conservative group, that medical centre, for supporting the CCGs. We didn't vote for it. We don't, as somebody pointed out earlier, the leader, we don't decide what happens with urgent care in Bury as councillors or as a Conservative group. We can comment, but it's not our decision. But we had it explain what they were trying to do. I hope it works. Something's got to be done about urgent care and A&E, and they are bringing forward that solution, which is now going out for a consultation. What surprised me about Silverdale Medical Centre attacking us, apart from being a very similar wording to this motion in places, was that they closed them 5 years ago in Salford, the urgent care centres. The other point I would make, I was interested to read that that medical centre was open till 6:30. In Ratcliffe, I think they're open till 8. So Theresa May wasn't attacking hard-working doctors who are open till 6:30 or 8 and doing their best to cope with growing problems. She was saying that where a medical centre, a GP practice closed at 3 o'clock, she wasn't sure whether it should have as much funding and so on. So I think we should get the facts. She wasn't just attacking all GPs. It said, Silverdale Centre said that we're an affluent country, and yet we're now in a humanitarian crisis, and we're a third world country. And Labour Party took this up, that we are like in a third world country. Somehow we like Syria, and I watched those moving operations in Aleppo where they were operating their anaesthetic on people. Having just been the dentist today without anaesthetic, I have a minor bit of sympathy, but they were having legs amputated, not to crown them. So how we can compare our hospital, and I have to say, as someone who has undergone, and I'm sure I'm not alone, acute care, medication, doctors, North Manchester, yes, Fairfield, Christie, all these, we have a very good, improving health service. I remember when I was first a councillor, if you want a hip replacement in Cheshire, you had to wait a long time to go to Wrightington, the other side of Wigan. That doesn't happen today. Whether it's improved under Labour, under Conservative, things have improved. So to compare us to Zimbabwe or Syria or Somalia, I think is extreme to have that as an official motion. And for Silverdale, so I'm sure what I read about them, very good medical centre. Why they should liken us to a third world country, I don't know. I think if you look at the cost, just briefly, and I know it's hard to keep up with the demand, but Bury CCG, I went back through their accounts, 211 million 12-13, 216 million 2013. I know it doesn't compare with Salford, 300 odd million and so on. They get a lot more money. They're a bit bigger than us and they have more problems. But then 2014-15, 225 million. The government is putting the amount to CCG and Bury because we were, as somebody said, not well provided for by the national formula. The government has recognised that and is putting each year more money in ahead of the real living costs. And so I think things are going to improve in Bury. They are doing at the moment. But, as we all know, there's never enough money to meet the demand. If you look at the NHS generally, 2005-6, 76 billion, 2015-16, 117 billion, 2016-17, 121 billion. In real terms and per capita, expenditure has gone up. And it needs to. I'm not trying to escape that, because there are more demands. I have treatment now that people of my parents' generation wasn't available to them. They just suffered in pain for 20, 30 years, whereas my pain has reduced, and I'm very happy about that. So there's lots of things. Injections we have that cost £200 odd. I sometimes wonder I should be doing something different to justify that than talking here to you and wasting my time because you're going to vote against me. The NHS Trust have had a net deficit of £2 billion. Demand outstrips expenditure, and we're trying to cope with the ever-increasing demand. I saw something, and I'll get in trouble for saying this, but it's true. People from the third world come here. Now, if we're worse than the third
Can I ask
world...
you to wind up, Councillor Walker?
Winding up. Why do people come and cost us £350,000 to have a baby, or another one today, £500,000 to have a baby? And no, this one.
No, we're not shouting out.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll keep it brief. But these people are coming here and then not paying anything, a penny towards it, and they go home. So that's a cost that could be saved. I knew that wouldn't be popular, but it's true.
Councillor Walker, you've had much longer than your 5 minutes.
Okay, well, my final thing was going to be to say, in real terms, we spend more money in the NHS than we did in 2009-10. And Andy Burnham at that point said if they won the election, he would cut the expenditure on the NHS. So in real terms, that's from the King's Fund. I haven't looked at Tory Party
Councillor
website.
Walker, that's it now. Thank
it's
you.
from the King's Fund. Thank you,
Thank you,
Mr. Mayor,
Councillor Walker.
for your indulgence.
Councillor Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And it was pretty obvious that all will be well in the NHS. But I actually, I've asked someone who works in it, my son. Is it all right? No. He happens to be a doctor, a registrar. And I'll tell you, sometimes at night, at 28, he's the most senior doctor in there. Sometimes, if the wards are quiet, he'll go down on A&E and help out, where they have two doctors with 45, try to treat 45 people. Councillor Parnell went on about Jeremy, Mr Hunt. And when he introduced this doctor's contract, Mr Mayor, applications to the BMA to work overseas surged by 1,000%. Well, what's happened under the last Labour government, under Alan Johnson? We doubled the number of junior doctors. We put the money in. And now, after all that millions of pounds worth of training, they're all going abroad where they get more money, they work less hours, and they're actually appreciated. And I know that we're pushed for time, and we've been quoting tonight, Mr Mayor. So I'll give a quote from Dr Dan Poulter, who happens to be a Tory MP. He was on Newsnight, and we're discussing the NHS in crisis. And he said, well, you're a doctor, Mr Poulter. In your opinion, what's needed? And he said, in short, a Blair Brown initiative. Well, you could, well, no. Well, I know you never believe what we say.
No, we're not having all that across the chamber. Councillor Caserta,
I believe it's called something like Catch Up TV. Catch Up TV or YouTube, one of these modern things where you can go on. And I believe his colleague, Dr Sarah Wollaston, said the same thing. We put the money in, we got the waiting list down, and we did the business. Deja vu, 1994. Yeah. Well, you know, it's fantasy. You know, it's a bit like Ken Clarkson about your let you go down that tunnel, it comes up full of wonderland. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Come on. Thank you. Councillor Harris is next. Then Councillor Daly.
Thank you. I shall be
Councillor
quite
Adam.
brief. First of all, I have to say that I objected to Councillor Parnell's comments that the other side of the chamber referring to us will be looking at Conservative Party crib sheets. I don't know how you can say that. You do not know that. Also, you say that the party on the other side of the chamber referring to us doesn't care about people. I don't know how you can say that because you have no evidence. I mean, you do take the moral high ground on the NHS, sort of like it was a Labour invention, which it wasn't. I just want... No, it was... Excuse me.
No,
Have you never heard...
No.
Can I just... I'm
Just
sorry.
a minute. Nobody interrupted anybody else, so let Councillor Harris speak without interruption.
Thank you. I don't wish to digress on my point, but have you never heard of the Beveridge report, which was actually a Liberal? But anyway, we're not even going to discuss that. It's irrelevant. You do take the moral high ground on this. I just want to make a couple of points. You referred to the Blair Brown years. You didn't mention North Staffs and that scandal, which Andy Burnham never actually apologised for the terrible scandal that went on under Labour. You haven't mentioned that. Labour runs the NHS in Wales, and the service is far inferior to the system in England. I just want to make the point also that it was Tony Blair that increased the purchase of provider split, and he introduced this, we increased this introduction of privatisation within the system. So this was a Tony Blair idea. Also, the PFI contracts, the principle of them were very, very good. But it was Labour who used the contracts to such a way that the hospitals are saddled with an unacceptable debt, which is part of the problem. I mean, you really have not come up with any solutions at all whatsoever. The other point I'd like to make is your party is in meltdown. I mean, I'm looking at the news, and also I'm looking at opinion polls. The vast majority of the public...
Keep it relevant to the debate.
Yes, it is. It is, Councillor, Madam, Mr Mayor, sorry, I keep wanting to call you Madam.
Now get it right, you know. Otherwise you need to go to Specsavers.
A slip of the tongue there. The public, and I'm looking at independent opinion polls, still trust the Conservatives more over the NHS than they do with Labour.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Councillor Daly.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Mayor. This speech, if I can call it that, from Councillor Parnell is predicated on the basis that any politician should take advice from the Labour Party on the NHS and any other issue. A party that is legendary for its incompetence and finding many, many ways to badly run every public function that it's ever had is not really a standout organisation that anybody else should follow. And why do I say that, Mr Mayor? When we talk about politicians, and when we talk about politicians that the people of Bury are going to have to vote for very shortly in terms of having a role in our local NHS services, well, during the last Labour government, 103 PFI deals were struck by the last Labour government. They were valued initially at 11.4 billion. By the time those are paid off, it will cost the taxpayer 65 billion. A 50 billion black hole, totally and utterly as a result of the Labour Party. This is a scheme, and these schemes, described by our friend Mr Burnham in 2007 as excellent value for money for the taxpayer. So the idea that we should take any notice of the Labour Party in respect of anything to do with the NHS is laughable. We listen to medical professionals, we listen to people who actually know what they're talking about, not rent-a-soundbite, very bad politicians who come... Well, I don't think I've quite got words to describe Councillor Parnell's speech. I'm very proud, Your Worships, to live in Bury. My two children were born in Bury, but I'm also equally proud to be from Huddersfield, my hometown. And there's one example, just for this fact, let's consider this about the genius of Labour on the NHS. And I can see Councillor Jones smiling. I hope you're smiling at the end of this.
Can I just remind members that we need to show respect to one another, please? Thank you. I've made the point, Councillor Parnell.
Calderdale Hospital was built at an initial cost of 34 million by way of a PFI deal in 1997, signed off by Alan Milburn, the Labour government, £34 million, the legendary competence of the Labour administration in respect of NHS services and provision. Now, this is the start of a £34 million hospital. What will it cost the taxpayer when it's paid off in 2031? Well, nobody will be able to guess this because it's beyond belief. 773 million. So the Labour government, who you constantly hold up as the example of how the NHS should be run, in their genius commissioned a hospital for 34 million, which will cost 773 million to pay off. So I welcome Councillor Parnell's comments in respect of that. And the reason why I say that is the hospital in which I was born, Huddersfield Royal Infirmary, the services there have been dramatically reduced as a result of that deal by that incompetent Labour administration, and you couldn't care less. All you care about is your cheap soundbite in here. You demean the debate by the drivel that's come out in here. Take some responsibility for the incompetence of your Labour government from 97 onwards.
Councillor Parnell, I'm dealing with it. I am dealing with it. I would remind you, Councillor, and other members, that, you know, we have a notice of motion that we agreed a couple of years ago now, that we treat each other with respect. It's been very, very good tonight, and I don't want that debate to kind of deteriorate any further. Councillor
What Councillor Hawke says about the money going in, money doesn't always reach the coal face. A lot of the time the money goes into another tier of management, or agency nurses, or paper bank staff that cost an awful lot of money. When we're looking at the health service, it should be the funding we're looking at and make sure that funding, that money goes to the people that are doing the work on the coal face.
Thanks, Councillor Adams. Councillor James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll be very quick. The motion makes a number of resolutions. It talks about public service, reversing the marketplace, providing health services fairly and cancelling its cuts. The best speech I've heard, or not the best speech because Councillor Parnell's speech I thought was very good, but one of the best comments or points I've heard today is, I think it was Mr Coates, and I apologise if I've got the name wrong, when he asked a supplementary question, because that is the clear indication of what is happening to our NHS. The NHS, the publicly funded service, is being reduced and disappearing so that other private services can come in and make money off people's illness. And that is where we are heading, and that is why this motion is absolutely right. It says we need to restore the balance back to a publicly funded service for the people and not for profit. And that is why I want to be supporting this motion and Councillor Parnell's excellent speech later on.
No, you've had your support. Councillor Howard, you can't speak again. Councillor Mallon and Councillor Gartside, and then that's it.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Everyone in the chamber, do we really care to comment whether it's personal or otherwise? I'm going to find out in a few minutes whether everybody in this chamber really cares. What I want to share, I'm not going to make any political points, what I want to share is the story, not a story, a lady I met actually this week, very resident, who at 3 o'clock in the morning at Fairfield Hospital was woken up, told that she was less urgent than the case that needed her bed. Could she please go home immediately in a taxi? Now that lady is 80 plus years of age and she lives on her own. Now if we cannot as a council start to work together to demand that our NHS service is actually invested in, and whether other councillors around the chamber have been sort of looking around, and whether some people think a Brown Blair initiative is funny or not, the fundamental point is our NHS needs that investment. We are discharging 80-year-old residents who live alone because they are less urgent than someone else who just come in straight in. And I don't know how many were in the queue in A&E who may have actually pulled that person out of the bed. Now it's an absolute disgrace that at 8, 9 o'clock at night, nursing staff make a decision to keep someone in hospital overnight because they need that observation or they need that care. But suddenly then at 3 o'clock in the morning, you call a taxi and send them home. If you feel that is right for our residents, I've really got to ask some serious questions of you as councillors and elected members, regardless of your party. I'm looking for every single person in this chamber tonight to support this motion. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In the last 6 years in the UK, the number of people aged over 80 has risen by 340,000, and life expectancy has risen by 12 months. Compared to 2009 and 10, and 15-16, there were 2.4 million more A&E attendances, 5.9 million more diagnostic tests, and 9.6 million more outpatient appointments. This increased demand on the NHS with an ageing population will be a massive challenge for this and all future governments. The government is committed to protecting the NHS, and that is why the NHS spending has increased overall, and ministers have guaranteed that it will always provide treatment free at the point of need, regardless of the ability to pay. Mr Mayor, the government has made it abundantly clear that it will not privatise the NHS. The use of private providers and the voluntary sector in the delivery of NHS services is not a new concept, as the last Labour government introduced the independent sector and competition into the NHS between 1997 and 2010. The focus throughout the NHS is to provide the highest quality of care for patients. The use of private providers in the NHS represents just over 7 pence in every pound the NHS spends, an increase of just 2.5 pence in the pound since 2010, and at a slower rate of growth than under Labour. Charities and social enterprises such as Macmillan Nurses continue to play an important role in the NHS, as they have done so for many years. Nationally this winter, the NHS has made more extensive preparations than ever before, and there are now 11,400 more doctors and 11,200 more hospital nurses in the NHS since 2010. To support the NHS, investment of 350 million was included in the local clinical commissioning group budgets for 16-17 for resilience planning, and 50 million was made available for national initiatives. The NHS also assured the winter plans of every trust, launched the largest ever flu vaccination programme, and bolstered support outside of A&Es with 12,000 additional GP sessions offered over the festive period. As a consequence of this preparation, and most importantly the hard work of frontline staff, the NHS treated a record number of patients within 4 hours, and we are seeing 2,500 more patients within the 4-hour standard every single day compared to 2010. However, Mr Mayor, I am aware that there are a number of trusts where the situation has been extremely fragile, and NHS England is considering a series of further measures to be taken forward on a temporary basis at the discretion of local clinical leaders. Taken together, these actions will give the NHS additional flexibility to take further measures if appropriate at a local level. It should also be noted, of course, that since April 2016, healthcare within the Greater Manchester area has been devolved to local councils. Despite tight public finances, the government has actively supported NHS' own plan for the future. That is why it's providing an additional 10 billion of investment per annum in real terms by 2020-21 compared to 14-15, requested to a transformational in care. The government requested in concurrent pressures facing local areas. This is why the government has given local authorities additional funding and flexibility so they will have access to the additional 3.5 billion by 2020, providing a real terms increase in social care funding by the end of this Parliament. The government is committed...
A minute left.
Yeah, I'm on the last paragraph, Mr Mayor. The government is committed to maintaining and delivering vital 4-hour A&E standards to patients. It is widely understood that too many people are going to A&E unnecessarily, and therefore we must look at ways to protect the 4-hour target for people who need it the most. This will be done through the triaging of people at the front doors and pointing them towards the most appropriate services, as well as giving them more information to the public so that they can make the right decisions about the services that they need to access. Mr Mayor and Council, I believe that the government remains committed to ensuring that the NHS offers the safest, highest quality care available anywhere in the world. We all cherish our NHS on all sides of the political divide, and we must get behind it and stop talking it down, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Gartside. Are there any amendments? No, in which case then, Councillor Parnell, would you like to sum up the debate?
Cracking debate. Crib sheets came out, the temper's not great. It's a shame, really. Councillor Walker, the understanding of the word crisis, this is the Oxford Dictionary. I'm sorry, Councillor Holt, I haven't got the dictionary to hand, but it says that it's an event that it's expected to lead to unsustainable or dangerous situations affecting individual or groups. I think doctors and nurses saying that it's becoming dangerous, deemed a crisis. Whether you want to call it third world or whatever, but the people who work for the NHS are saying it's a crisis.
Humanitarian crisis like the third world.
Councillor Walker, no interruptions,
I'm
please.
sorry,
No.
13, 14.
I'm not allowing it. I'm not allowing it.
Well,
Councillor Walker, sit down.
I said at all.
Sit down, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Harris, Andy Burnham on the 22nd of April 2015. I apologise. So that must have missed you by. Just like everyone else thinks that the Conservatives put the health service together. The group chiefs, like to say, they came out. It would have been nice. It would have been nice to hear St. Margaret Thatcher talk about Hargreaves or Hillsborough. I apologise for what went on there, but never really got a chance, did we? But no, I was talking about the health service as well. But ultimately, Andy Burnham also said, yeah, he would make cuts, but he didn't also say that he would cut local authority spending by nearly half. And we're all well aware that acute care and social care go hand in hand, and the vision that he had there, you know, was cut short because people were saying, you know, we'll save certain parts of the health service when we come to power, and they didn't. All that's happened since it's been cut. So I don't want to stand there and drivel on it too long. I'll leave it at that. But thanks very much for the debate.
Thanks, Councillor Parnell. We'll now move to the vote. All those in favour of the motion proposed by Councillor Parnell and seconded by Councillor Holt? All those against? Thank you. Abstention? The motion is carried. We now move on to the third notice of motion. A motion has been received concerning the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework has been received from the councillors listed in the summons. The details of the motion are set out in the summons, and I call on Councillor Pitchstone to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I have the pleasure of moving this motion tonight on behalf of the Liberal Democrat Group on the withdrawal of Bury from the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. Members of the Council will no doubt be aware, Mr. Mayor, of the highly controversial proposals set out in the GMSF that, if they were to come to happen, would significantly change the face of this borough forever. We, Mr. Mayor, don't believe that what is proposed is in any way right for this borough, and we believe that we should send a very clear message tonight, draw a very clear line under this madness at the earliest opportunity, and proceed with a local plan for Bury, as so eloquently described by the leader earlier. Mr. Mayor, you and members will be aware that it is only 140 days tonight since every single councillor in this chamber voted in favour of a motion expressing our continued support for the principle of the Green Belt and for the reasons that make the Green Belt a good idea. Mr. Mayor, the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework is a particularly bad deal for Bury. It's a terrible deal for Bury. We do need to do something because this is not the right thing for this borough. Under the proposals, Mr. Mayor, Bury has proposed to lose so much of our irreplaceable green spaces. Green belt, land in the north and centre of the borough, land around Elton Reservoir, around Walshaw, Holcombe Brook, Baldingstone and other areas, and in the south of the borough, a whole swathe of Prestwich, Whitefield and Unsworth would be lost underneath a massive expansion of the continuous urban build from the city centre, where there would essentially be no gaps between Prestwich, Middleton, Whitefield, Unsworth and Hayward and Manchester. Councillor Wright, Councillor Dalbert and myself have the honour, Mr. Mayor, of representing 1.5 very special villages in our ward, Simister and Bowley, which will be subsumed under this extension of the continuous urban environment. In fact, Mr. Mayor, Bury is set to lose 20% of its precious green belt, We should all take our share, you may say, but in actual fact, the average across the Greater Manchester is to just lose 8% of green belt. So this is, I believe, a bad deal for Bury, and it gets worse because it's proposed that Prestwich will lose 47% of its green belt, which is disgraceful, and even worse, the area of the Whitefield and Unsworth Township Borough will lose 48% of its green belt, also terrible. How can this be fair, and how can this possibly be a good deal for Bury? I'd like to quote, Mr Mayor, from a local resident, if I may. By making such a large amount of green belt available to developers, this will mean that many brownfield sites will be left undeveloped as house builders seek to utilise the much more profitable green sites to build much larger, more expensive properties. The consequence would be that much needed affordable homes that are required will not be built. The aspiration to affordably rent or buy a property would remain out of reach by far too many, and that's by a Mr I. Lewis of Prestwich. Another local resident, it is clear that many local communities feel strongly that this plan, as currently drafted, is unfair and disproportionate. As a result, it could diminish quality of life in some communities and restrict people's access to good air and good green space. I believe the current plan needs to be subject to a radical rewrite, with the results in a substantial reduction in the loss of green belt, and that's Mr A. Burnham from Lee. Mr Mayor, who's not quite a local resident, I was cheating there, I agree. Mr Mayor, I very rarely agree with a word Mr Burnham says, particularly his recent stated views on immigration, and I certainly don't agree with both these gentlemen who've just gone through the lobbies to vote with Theresa May and UKIP to vote for a cruel, hard Brexit, which I'm sorry I couldn't resist, Mr Mayor. But on this, they are right. This is a bad deal for Bury, and the Liberal Democrat group at least will not sit idly by while these proposals happen. Secondly, Mr Mayor, I want to talk about why the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework process has turned out to be so wrong, and this is where I do disagree with these two members of Parliament. Firstly, we need to just set two things straight. We do undoubtedly need more housing in Greater Manchester. Let nobody suggest that we believe anything else. But crucially, we need better housing. We need housing that young people can afford to move into. We need housing that older people can be proud to live in later life. And we need to improve the very poor state of housing in too many areas. And we do undoubtedly need more jobs in Greater Manchester, and let nobody suggest anything otherwise. But crucially, we need better jobs, jobs that are worthy of us being the great world city that this city region is. But there are some ways that the approach that the GMSF has got it all wrong. Our Liberal belief is that local communities should be in the driving seat of determining the future shape of their communities, that these ideas should start from the bottom up, essentially. What housing do we need? Where should it be built? What's built? What services need improving? What green space needs protecting and what does not? And this is our first principle, Mr Mayor. But GMSF has categorically not done this. It's not started at the bottom with local communities, but it started at the top at a Greater Manchester level. In fact, even worse, it started with a call for sites where we asked landowners and developers to provide a wish list of where they would like to build. And surprise, surprise, Mr Mayor, Peel Holdings would like to build all around Elton Reservoir, and the aristocracy, which is what Wilton Estates is, would like to build all around Simister and Bowley. We're also concerned, Mr Mayor, that GMSF is proposing growth that is not sustainable. We live in Britain on an island, and certainly the last time I asked, that island is not getting any bigger. But our population is getting bigger, and we need to find a way of living in generations to come that is in tandem with this green and pleasant land that we've been lucky to have been given. And what this does not mean, as far as we're concerned, is that we need to build more of everything, more motorways, more roads, and cover up our green spaces in an unsustainable way. And a classic example of this is the Northern Gateway, a development larger in size than Trafford Park, straddling Bury and Rochdale. And just to show again what a bad deal this is for Bury, the vast majority of the employment land would actually be in Rochdale, so they get the business rates rather than Bury. And my fear is that what we will see here is what we've seen, for example, on the Bolton-Wigan border, if you drive up the M61, which is a proliferation of very low-rise distribution warehouses next to a motorway, which is certainly not what I wish to live next to. Mr Mayor, I'm sure you will have attempted to drive down the M60 in the morning or evening rush hour, and that you will agree with me that the motorway is full. In fact, it's more than full. It was full before the smart motorway works, and it'll be full after the smart motorway works. And how anybody thinks that a massive industrial and employment site will make that any better, I do not understand. It'll be more northern gridlock than northern gateway. GMSF alludes to transport improvements in the northwest quadrant of the M60 and the government's own parallel work on this. There are suggestions of a new motorway from Middleton Hayward on the M62 over to the Orrell interchange on the M6. And I can't be the only person, Mr Mayor, who has noticed that there are a few things in the way. One of them's Whitefield, one of them's Radcliffe. What we certainly don't believe is that just building more motorways is in any part an answer to a sustainable future. Mr Mayor, I don't know if you remember what you were doing at 6 AM on the 1st of November last year. I don't either. But what I can tell you is that at that time, our air quality monitoring station on Radcliffe Road was reporting the worst air pollution in Britain. And in fact, in the top 10 worst air pollution in Europe. And GMSF, by building on so much of our green spaces and crazy ideas like new motorways, will add to this, not make it worse. Mr Mayor, the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework is not only bad for Bury, but it's also a bad process. And the quicker we go back to the drawing board, the better. It almost feels like we're only being given one option, and that it's GMSF or nothing else, and the world will end if we don't take it. And it actually reminds me the last time that Greater Manchester leaders thought they knew better with the Greater Manchester congestion charge, when we were told that if we didn't have this, it would be the end of the world, there would be no new tram lines, no public transport extension, but lo and behold, the Metrolink network is now 4 times the size without that congestion charge. What we propose, Mr Mayor, is that Bury develops its own plan, as described by the leader early on, obviously in conversations with our neighbours. But what the plan will do is enable us to be more sensitive to our local needs. And we also propose only suggesting a 15-year supply of houses, which is what many other local authorities have done, which means 1/3 less land supply to be identified, which means that the more difficult decisions don't have to be taken. But we will have to make these difficult decisions, but at least we'll be making them in Bury on the basis of the needs of Bury people. I'm sure the movers of the amendment shortly will tell us that we are jumping the gun, and in a way we are, and perhaps I'll address this, and I think I am allowed to speak on the amendment if it's moved, Mr Mayor. But ultimately we're elected to serve our electorate, and I'm pretty clear what our electorate believes, that this process is wrong, and we either stop it today, and we will continue as Liberal Democrats to try and stop this process right the way through, both in Bury and across Greater Manchester. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Pickstone. I ask Councillor Steve Wright to second the motion.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I will be brief.
I think that applause was from Councillor Pickstone,
not me.
You.
Crikey. Mr Mayor, I'm slightly befuddled and perplexed. We moved a motion 14th of September about the green belt, and then sort of 7 weeks later, we then ratified the draft approved GMSF, which they sort of don't go in together. I think Councillor Pickstone's covered all the points. I'm just going to give the bullet points so everybody can just be very careful of this. GMSF want to use 8% of the green belt. In Bury, we've got to take 20% of a hit. In my area, Prestwich, 48%, and also Unsworth takes 49%. I sit looking at a map and try to wonder in my ward, the area that is not wanted for housing. I really do struggle. I'll mention Simster again. It is a really, really good community, a really lovely village, and it's just going to be absolutely decimated. It's going to be whatever people want to call it, Simster Newtown or whatever it's going to be. We're not anti-jobs, you know, anti-prosperity, anti-development, anything like that. We just think this is a completely unfair deal for Bury as a whole, especially for Prestwich and Unsworth. We just want everyone to show a bit of community leadership, everyone in the council, and support us, and to say, look, this GMSF needs rethinking. We'll do our own plan until we come up with something absolutely better. So, great pleasure to second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Are there any comments? Councillor Gartside, then Councillor John.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It is my group's strongly held view that the GMSF in its current form is deeply flawed on many levels. As a result of that, it has thrown up and earmarked a number of greenbelt sites in our borough that simply should not be under threat. It is of course sensible to have a plan setting out how land should be used in the future, taking into account the need for future housing, jobs and infrastructure. However, the GMSF will fundamentally change areas residents live in, and it will permanently remove areas of amenity that they currently visit to enjoy unspoilt countryside. When considering the GMSF, it's important to remember that this will change the area permanently for all future generations. The GMSF covers a period of up to 2035. It is my understanding that there is no legal reason stipulating why it must cover such a long period of years. The draft Greater Manchester Combined Authority Functions and Amendment Order 2016 does not mention a specific time frame that GMSF must cover. There is also nothing in the Greater London Authority Act 1999, which is the legislation from which many of the powers of the Greater Manchester area are copied from. Development plans in general are provided for in the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004, and there are no timeframe stipulations in that either. The National Policy Framework gives guidance on what is normally considered to be an appropriate timeframe for local plans. The NPPF suggests that these plans be drawn up over an appropriate timescale, preferably a 15-year time horizon. Assuming the GMSF were to be adopted in 2018, its planned length of time of operation would exceed this recommendation for a local plan. So, Mr Mayor, the timeframe for development is too lengthy and unnecessary in my view. The GMSF consultation is based on a projected population growth of 294,000 by 2035, which GMSAA equates to a requirement of 227,000 of net new homes. So over half of these new homes would be expected to be constructed in Bury. I doubt the accuracy of these figures and query whether they overestimate the projected population increase. The baseline forecast change suggests a Greater Manchester population change of 214,000 between 2014 and 35, of up to 537,000 in the higher accelerated growth scenario. Even within the National Office for National Statistics projections in recent years, there has been significant variance. Within Bury, over the last 5 years, there has been a change of population from 185,000 in mid-2011 to just 187,000 in mid-2015, according to ONS estimates. The GMSF would seem to suggest that this trend would increase far more than it has in the last 5 years. So, Mr Mayor, the population projections seem flawed to me. That is without mentioning the impact on the levels of European migration post-Brexit. I do not accept that the projected figure of the number of dwellings required. I believe these figures overestimate the numbers of houses required and query the figure of 227,000 new homes being built. If one looks at the figures the GMSF are based on, there is an expectation of approximately 1.3 persons per dwelling. The 2011 census had a UK average of 2.3 persons per dwelling compared to 2.4 in 2001. This therefore seems to assume that a lot more people will be living alone and households are getting significantly smaller, far more than the rate in the previous decade. And then you have, Mr Mayor, the projected number of vacant properties. Whilst the numbers are falling, I believe there needs to be continued attention given to bringing back empty properties into use, which would reduce the number of new dwellings required. I'll skip. I'll cut to the chase. Okay. Mr Mayor, the GMSF is flawed on unrealistic future popular growth projections, misses the opportunity to build more affordable homes on greater density brownfield sites, thinks that too few people will be occupying homes in the future, neglects and ignores the legal obligations to protect our beloved wildlife and areas of special interest, mistakenly thinks that housing developers have or would be prepared to invest in the required investment in our highways infrastructure, overlooks the strains it would place on local amenities, such as school places and medical services. Instead, Mr Mayor, we need a Bury local plan designed by Bury people and for Bury people. Before any other campaign or political group even blinked an eyelid on this, it was Bury Conservatives that have been calling for such a plan at council meetings, township forums, and we're having meetings with planning officers since the Coalition's government in 2011 Localism Act and neighbourhood planning legislation. I hope and pray, Mr Mayor, that now in 2017, this council will at long last support this motion and set the wheels in motion to start our own local plan. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Jones and then Councillor Shorey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I wasn't going to speak in this debate, but as an Unsworth ward councillor, the area of Unsworth being quite significantly affected by what's proposed in this first draft, I've chosen to make a few brief comments. Number one is that when I was out on the streets campaigning last May, and I was re-elected to represent Unsworth, the people of Hollins Village in particular, that well-known little quarter that appears to have been virtually abandoned by the planners since the bowling alley and all that lot have been demolished, were hell-bent on me understanding once and for all that they did not want any more housing in Hollins Village. Why? Because the infrastructure wouldn't stand it, and the schools weren't in place, and for the very reasons that we've heard here this evening. And I made it my business to make sure that the Greenbelt piece of land in question was not included in the first draft, and it isn't. My point is that Hollins is not the only part of the borough that is protected by this first draft of the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. There are areas of Hawkshaw, there are areas of Holcombe Brook, Ainsworth, Affetside. If we adopt a different strategy, a different local plan, are we as elected members going to go to these residents in Hawkshaw and Affetside and Ainsworth and explain to them that what was once protected now won't be because we've changed the rules again? So I, for one, speaking as an Unsworth ward councillor, in a part of the borough that has been neglected in some areas, has had the voice of its councillors listened to in another area. And the piece of land in question is on Hollins Lane, opposite the golf club. That is not in the first draft. That's why I am defending the principle of this draft Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. I'm not suggesting it's perfect. I know there are 1,000 things wrong with it. The data's wrong, it's flawed, all sorts of adjectives can be used. But the principle that it has protected some areas of the borough should not be gone unmissed. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Shorey, then Councillor Daly, then Councillor Harris.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor, and thank you for the contribution so far. The Labour Group wants to approach this in a constructive manner, and I appreciate Councillor Pickstone's speech. I'll just make a very few brief comments, because of course there's an amendment, which I think is another constructive attempt to take this forward. The key point, though, in fairness, Councillor Pickstone, you didn't explain, and perhaps you will, bearing in mind my initial comments at the start of the evening, is how having a local plan actually puts us in a better or more advantageous position in relation to the release of the Greenbelt. I mentioned in my opening remarks that in 2011, the housing projections for Bury from the Department for Communities and Local Government were 625. And because there were 625, and the local plan that we put forward in 2013 only accounted for 400, we were asked to withdraw our plan. So what you've not specified, and I'm sure you will, how that local plan is actually going to protect the Greenbelt. I think that's quite an important point, because what we shouldn't do is say, oh, well, we'll start a local plan process and that will solve all our problems, because ultimately we will still need to release Greenbelt if that annualised figure remains the same, which it is. And then ultimately you may end up in a situation, as Councillor Jones sort of identified, where different areas of the borough are pitched against each other in terms of the release of Greenbelt. The point that was really well made was about a 15-year plan relative to a 20-year plan. What that means, however, it doesn't mean that each year we have to find the annualised housing target changes. It still remains at 600. So actually, it doesn't put us in any different position than we were when we introduced our own local plan in 2013, or at least submitted it. So we will still have to release Greenbelt even if we have a 15-year plan. Under the GMSF, what it allows for, and you're right, obviously more greenbelt would have to be released, but what it allows for is a phasing of that release. So on day one, if the GMSF was adopted, and of course I think there will be substantial moderations, you can actually phase certain sites. So some sites would be released after 5 years, some after 10 years, some after 15 years, some perhaps after 20 years. You don't have that protection in terms of the local plan scenario. This issue about 20% of Berry's greenbelt being released, well, that's a gross figure because, of course, not all of this land will be built on. But secondly, 2/3 of that greenbelt, so 2/3 of the 20%, is actually linked to the Northern Gateway site, which is 800 hectares, and more than half of that is actually employment land. And actually, some of that site includes the motorway, which is still designated as greenbelt. So I don't think that's sort of greenbelt you're talking about. Secondly, some of it is a former tip and an active tip, which is why it's been selected for employment land rather than residential. So 20% sounds like a big figure, but 15% is actually on one site, which is cut off by the motorway, which actually has good transport links, because if it were to go ahead, there'd have to be direct access to the motorway and a junction would be put in. But I think that's quite an important point. You can't look at the average, because Greater Manchester as a city hasn't released any greenbelt because it hasn't got any greenbelt. So if you look at the average, of course Berry's giving up more because Manchester isn't giving up any because it's got none to give up. I think the final point is, we talk about this point about not being against jobs or growth. But as I said in my earlier comments, this is not just a housing plan. It's also about growth. And bearing in mind the Northern Gateway is really the only premier employment site that we have in Bury. Where are the new jobs going to go to? Where are the new businesses going to locate? Now, this isn't a party political point, because it's all very strange, this, because obviously the council who led the GMSF process until she lost the seat was Sue Derbyshire, the Liberal Democrat leader of Stockport. And of course, they dealt with the same motion a few weeks ago. And actually, Labour and the Tories said, well, actually, this isn't the right thing to do at this stage. So it's not a political point, because you've got Sean Anstey, the Tory mayoral candidate, saying we need to push ahead with jobs and growth. It's not a political point. What I'm trying to do is we need to try and find a solution which meets our needs. So I accept that point that you made. I would like to move the amendment, but I'll wrap up there. Mr.
Thanks, Councillor Shorey. Councillor Daly.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to touch on 2 points. When we talk about the GMSF, there are 2 distinct issues. One is the identification of sites, and the second one is the population projections. I, on a personal level, think the present consultation has been a complete waste of time. It has identified sites where members of the public and councillors have gone and put forward very valid considerations regarding poor infrastructure and various other things that make those sites unsuitable, to simply be met with the reply, oh, well, we'll sort that out later on. It's not an issue now. Some miracle will occur whereby suddenly there'll be infrastructure built that will take 3,000 houses at Elton or in various other places. It has been the most bizarre consultation in respect of that I have ever come across. In terms of the population projections, which I think is the most important point in respect to this debate, some of the comments from the Leader of the Council I find quite extraordinary. The Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, we can have a discussion regarding whether it's at site in Unsworth or My Ward, North Manor, or anywhere else, but the issue is the population projections. The draft GMSF was signed off by every leader of every council in Greater Manchester. The leader of this council was well aware of the population projections upon which that document was based. Those population projections are the basis for the loss of greenbelt within this borough. It could be Elton, it could be anywhere, it could be in various places, but the level of building of the greenbelt, or the greenbelt being taken out, that land being taken out of the greenbelt, is based upon those population projections. The government provided basic figures. It's laughable in what we're about to hear.
Mr. Mayor, a point of order, personal explanation.
Yeah, go on.
I think I've explained that the growth figures in the GMSF are at 626. In 2011, there were 625. So those are household projections provided by communities, the Department of Communities, local government. So you're saying that we signed off the figures and the market are different. They remain the same for 5 years, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Daly.
Thank you very much. So you have a Labour authority here who agrees with the population projections, what happened? The government provided figures to the Agmar authorities. The Agmar authorities decided to employ a company to put forward various strategies in respect to population growth. The leaders of the authorities within Greater Manchester chose an accelerated population growth upon which to base the population figures, which is going to lead to your green belt being built on. That wasn't the government's decision, that was Councillor Shaw's decision, and the other people who made
Point of personal explanation, Mr. Mayor.
Amazing how I get interrupted at every point.
But because you're not telling the truth, you're lying, and I'm afraid that's a lie. The household projections in 2011 are the same, and to be fair, you're a lawyer. I've just called you out for being a liar. The household projections in 2011 are one less than what is being proposed on an annualised basis under the GMSF. That is the same, and it's been the same for 5 years. So to suggest that somehow we have turbocharged the GMSF, so we're going to have far more housing than would be the case if we had our own local plan, is simply not true. Simply not true.
So can I...
You can carry on with your speech.
Can I say that yet again the leader of this council disgraces himself in this council chamber by making slurs against people based upon no information whatsoever. If he can't handle information and debate, he certainly shouldn't be leading this council.
Carry on with your speech, please.
But it perhaps explains, as you've heard now, this explains why your green belt is being built on, because this is the level of the debate that we have.
Councillor Daly, no speeches to the public gallery, please.
I wouldn't like to speak to the public now.
Contain your speech to the council, or I'll ask you to sit down. Would you like to carry on, please?
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Mayor. I believe that the figures upon which the GMSF, the housing figures which are provided by the government, are the figures upon which building over the... I don't need to articulate further upon what Councillor Pigson has said. Councillor Pigson is absolutely right in respect to those matters. But I ask you, all members of the public, if I'm allowed, I'm obviously not allowed to address members, taxpayers of this borough, and everybody else, to look in detail upon what the basis of this plan is. We can, if we support this motion today, scrap this motion. We can base the household projections on more realistic household projections, which would lead to Greenbelt being saved within our borough. It would lead to Greenbelt being saved within our borough. And within this vote here, the building of 3,000 houses within Elton has a huge impact upon local residents. Within this vote, in the next few minutes that you are going to hear, this is a chance to put a stop to this, to actually make sure and to reflect on what we are doing, to make sure the figures are accurate upon which this document is based, and that is exactly what we should do. The consultation, in my opinion, has been a joke. It was an attempt to rush out a consultation without notifying any members of the public. It was hoped you would all ignore it, and it would just go through without any further ado. So everything to do with this consultation process has been unacceptable. You have been badly served by this Labour group. This document should be started again. It should be done in a responsible manner, and that's why I'll be voting against the Labour motion today.
Thank you, Councillor Daly. Can I just remind the members of the public, I know you're passionate about, but this is a serious debating chamber, not a music hall. Councillor Harris, I'll come back to you.
Thank you. Before I start, I do think, Mr. Mayor, you should ask Councillor Shorey, the leader, to retract his comment.
Councillor Harris, can I ask you to stick to the points you were going to make,
well,
please?
I just
No. That's for later. That's for another place. That's not for you. Can you make your point, please?
I will make my point, but surely if somebody
stick to the debate, or I will ask you to sit down.
I also want to reiterate that many residents were completely unaware of what was happening. Now, when this point was put to officers, the comment was, well, you mean you don't read the Bury Times or you don't go on the website? Well, I had a number of people who said to me, is this a condition of living in our borough that we have to read the Bury Times? And others said, I do not have a computer, I'm not on the internet. So the whole principle of the consultation was very poorly enacted. There was very generously a 2-week extension allowed, but at the end of the day, people, and I'm speaking to a lot of residents, not just in what you might say my area of my council ward, and I'm not just referring to, as you might say, Tory NIMBYs in Tory areas. It's not the case. Many, many people have said to me, well, if they build all these houses, and it has been asked at the township forums, where on earth are the roads going to be widened? It's not possible. Who's going to provide the schools? Who's going to provide any other infrastructure, even things like the sewers and the drains? And the answer has been given, well, the developers will do that. Now, this is pure fantasy. The developers will not do that. And it's also pure fantasy to even think that extra people coming into the borough will bring in more council tax, which they will, but it certainly would not be anything like enough to provide the kind of infrastructure that is required for this. I'm sorry to be rude, but crazy plan. It really is absurd. I mean, we're talking about a 15-year plan. I disagree with even that, because a 20-year plan is ludicrous. Figures for economic and demographics have been as wrong as many times as they're right. I mean, as an example, after Brexit, the economy was going to crash. It hasn't happened so far, thank goodness. The point I'm making is, how can anybody make such a prediction for population growth? They're as wrong as many times as they're right. And my only concern is, if this flawed document continues, what will happen is the developers, and this does surprise me on this side of the chamber, that what you are doing actually is you are allowing landowners to speculate and make an awful lot of money, because they will hold this land on their balance sheets and they will make lots of profit. I'm in favour of profit as opposed to you, but I think this is completely at the expense of the local residents. It has not been any satisfactory answers. I have written 2 letters into the consultation process, bringing a point about where is the infrastructure. We need to be shown any kind of infrastructure plans, and proper plans, not just vague things about Elton School, of which I'm a governor, is going to be able to cope with these extra children who are going to be living in the area. I'm on the Board of Governors. They could have at least discussed whether this was possible. This gives me the impression this document is kind of airy-fairy, and I absolutely agree. Bury must have a plan. It must be sustainable, proven to be sustainable, and it must be with the blessing, the agreement of the majority of the taxpayers of this borough. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Do we have any amendments?
I'd like to move an amendment on behalf of the Labour Group. I think, obviously, we tried to approach this in a constructive manner. Of course, some people have taken the low road and suggested that Bury Labour Group, a Labour-run council in Bury, has on its own decided to go off on a frolic, going outside the policy guidance, which is a national planning policy framework. As I said in my answer earlier, the GMSF has to apply. It has to accord with national legislation around planning, right? So it has to be within a legislative framework. And I think that is the whole point. And going back to the point I made in my earlier remarks, no one has actually explained how a local plan will put us in any different position. And the point I keep making, and there have been misleading comments made tonight, the household projections in 2011 prepared by the government are at 626. The annualised target under the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework for Bury is 625. That's the difference of one household. Now, that is a matter of fact. And quite frankly, if somebody's saying something different, well, that's not true. That's the truth of it. So what we're trying to do is come forward with a solution or a proposal which takes on board some of the comments that have been made in a constructive way, not getting to a name-calling exercise, because either you believe in the protection of Greenbelt or you don't. What we have explained, and it hasn't just been this Labour Council, but the Conservative Council, when it was led in Bury in 2011, submitted almost the same local plan. We couldn't get out of the fact that the need for housing, which we're obliged to meet, was over and above the brownfield land that we had available. The amendment that we've put forward seeks to try and move this matter forward. It mentions the fact that there is consensus amongst local MPs of different political parties, mayoral candidates, and importantly, the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England, who also accept that we do need some form of plan in place. Now, this is the first iteration, but everyone accepts that a plan should be in place. Councillor Wright made a point, and actually it's dealt with in the motion. He said, well, the National Planning Policy Framework says you can't build on Greenbelt. But a point I've made earlier today is that the recent decision by Gavin Barwell, the Housing Minister, to allow 6,000 homes to be built on Greenbelt in Birmingham erodes that protection. And the reason given, and it hadn't been before, is that housing need is something that can override the Greenbelt protection. The point I'm making to you is that we need to be very, very careful in Bury, because actually that Greenbelt protection won't be there unless we have some form of plan. That's the point we're making. I think that's just factual. The points you make about the transport network and so on and so forth, accept that. This hasn't been dealt with in this first part of the consultation. There will be a second part if it goes that far, but ultimately master planning around various sites will be done then. But you have to accept, actually, the transport issues are the same whether they're on brownfield or otherwise. We have to accept that. What we are suggesting is, and hear me out, is that we remain part of the GMSF process pending, one, an analysis being undertaken in relation to a housing white paper, which Sean Anstey, the leader of Trafford, told me is due on the 16th of February. That could fundamentally change our obligations full stop. It may actually deal with this dichotomy that we face, that we are legally obliged to meet housing need, but also protect Greenbelt. So that's due on the 16th of February. Forget about the first consultation of the GMSF. I would say it's precipitous to do this before we know what the legislation is going to say. It might completely change it. A point I've made before, surely we need to wait. Nothing's going to happen now, between now and May. Surely we should wait to the outcome of the mayoral election. You've already heard one member of the public say, well, do you support the position of Dr. Andy Burnham? I think, grudgingly albeit, Councillor Pickstone said, actually, this is something that I agree with. If he has strategic mayoral powers, you don't know what the next iteration of the GMSF is going to look like. But you pull out now, then we have to start work on a local plan, which is our own standalone local plan. But I'll come on to that in a moment. And obviously, we need to have a full and detailed analysis of what the first consultation of the GMFS says. When I spoke before in my earlier answer, I talked about how actually officers had started working on a local plan on the basis that, well, the GMSF may fall. I mean, to date, however, that's not been subject to public scrutiny or indeed scrutiny by members of this chamber. What I'm suggesting is that we immediately open this up with officers and other councillors to start work on our local plan. We still have to deal with this issue about objectively assessed need and how we bridge that gap and how actually we protect the Greenbelt, but that is a good starting point and perhaps will be informed by the Housing White Paper. And the final thing is the issue about population projections keeps being brought up, and understandably so. I'd already mentioned, I'd written to David Nuttall about that. Whatever anyone says, those housing projections, the household projections for a borough, are not set by Bury Council. They go from, there's figures from the Office of National Statistics, which then converted into housing projections by DCLG. We don't control those figures. It's interesting to note that the CPR, Campaign for the Protection of Rural England report, obviously they're vehemently against the GMSF, I think put the figure for new homes at 200,000 compared to the 226. So there's that gap. It's not a huge gap, but there's a gap. And of course, we need to see what that's like, what that means for Bury if it's pro-rated out across the 10 local authorities. But I'd also make the point that the projections that were put forward were obviously agreed before we knew what the government's position on Brexit was. So it was only in the last couple of weeks that actually Theresa May has come out and said it's ostensibly going to be a hard Brexit, we're going to leave the single market, and ultimately there's going to be curbs on immigration. Well, obviously that's going to have an impact on the figures. And quite rightly, we should be challenging those figures. So what we're saying is that we contact the relevant minister, I've already contacted David Nuttall, and have a discussion about the figures. So I think that's a pretty reasonable thing to do, because of course, the lower the figures in terms of population projections, then ultimately that affects the housing projections. The lower the housing projections, then ultimately the less land that's needed for homes. Now, a lot of these points are beyond the control of a local authority per se, but we can work with local MPs on a cross-party basis, etc. But to pull ourselves out of the GMSF process now, without knowing what the legislation is going to be, we've not known what the view of the newly elected mayor is going to be, although we're pretty clear on at least what two candidates think about it, it just seems precipitous. But also, at this moment in time, we don't have enough land to meet a 5-year housing supply. So you could end up, and this is a point made by the leader of Stockport Tories last week, you could end up by release of Greenbelt by planning appeal, because we don't have a 5-year supply of land in Bury. It's not how many units you can deliver, it's how quickly those can be brought to be delivered. So we actually physically don't have a 5-year supply of land. So you could get a housing developer making an application for Greenbelt that gets turned down at a planning committee here locally in Bury, and then the determination is made by the Secretary of State. And of course, as the Birmingham example tells us, it gave us that example before Christmas, the government does accept housing need now as something that overrides the NPPF and the protection of the Greenbelt. I think this moves us forward. We can do it constructively, and of course we can revisit it in 6 months' time or what have you. But I think we should carefully consider what we're talking about, because no one, in fairness, has said, no one has made the case about how a local plan puts us in any more different position. And I would make the point, a local plan would be site-specific. We haven't developed a completely new formula for how the GMSF has allocated sites. A local plan wouldn't be specific in terms of what infrastructure or who would pay for it. And these are really important points, because what is being suggested by some people in the chamber is that the local plan solves all our problems. Well, it doesn't. Obviously, the GMSF is based on how the local plan process would work. And I think that's an important thing to remember. So I think this takes us forward, and I hope constructively, and I certainly hope, particularly the Liberal Democrat members, will support this motion as a means of moving us forward towards shared objectives.
Thanks, Councillor Shorey. Members who've got timepieces and will be watching, I did allow Councillor Shorey a little bit extra there because I felt it was important that he explained properly the nature of the amendment. Is there a seconder for the amendment? Councillor Walmsley.
Yes.
You're not going to be granted the same privilege.
Oh, right. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'd stand to second, but I reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Walmsley. Comments? Anybody? Councillor James.
Mr Mayor, promises are being made in this chamber, perhaps in the gallery, that they will scrap, that the scrapping of the GMSF, and we will have our own plan, and all will be well. These promises made to the gallery, we need to see what will happen to them in the future. As Councillor Shorey has said, there are a number of different things that are going to happen in the very near future, one of which is the mayoral elections. Councillor Sean Anstey is the Conservative candidate, as we know, for the mayoral election. He says, to quote him, that attempts to stop the GMSF is deplorable. That's his quote. Will the Conservative group opposite support him in the mayoral election? If they do, then it will show that they are effectively supporting the GMSF. If they do not support him, if they don't stand up for his election, then of course I'll be the first to congratulate them on that. But this, I'm afraid, is just playing to the gallery. Councillor Shorey has suggested a way forward. It's sensible. It takes into account what's going to happen in the very near future, and I would ask you to support that amendment.
Thanks, Councillor James. Any other speakers? Councillor Pickstone, you can speak in the amendment, but I'll just remind you that you do get the right to reply at the end. Okay.
I'll be brief, Mr Mayor. My group have made our position clear. We acknowledge that our own local plan, isn't something that's a magic wand that can be waved. There is still major challenges that we would have to address. But the key point is, Mr Mayor, is that it would be very people addressing those challenges, not the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, which is, by the way, Labour ran. So our position is we don't want anything to do with the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. We feel that what they've done in the way that they've gone about it has been deeply flawed. We've now come to the position that we think it's for the people of Bury to decide how we go forward. Councils like Chorley, for an example, had their plan put in years and years ago, and if this council would have set a course to do a local plan like what we were calling for since 2011, then we wouldn't be stood here having this debate. We'd have a plan. But unfortunately, we've had to bow down to the Labour-controlled Greater Manchester Combined Authority, who then themselves have chosen to go down the accelerated growth route when the government gave them the option not to do that. And I find it peculiar, Mr. Mayor, that on this amendment, it's asking to go down to government to discuss housing projections and the objectively assessed need in the context of the Prime Minister's recent statement. If we did that, I think what we would find is that the actual housing projections would actually increase from what we are now, because the government's own projections are less than what the Greater Manchester Combined Authorities are, which they chose, which was their own plan, the accelerated growth option. So I find that extremely peculiar that we would want to do that. So I'll leave it there, Mr. Mayor, but my group can't support this amendment. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Walmsley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In seconding the Labour amendment, I want to make a couple of points, really. Firstly, it is clear from the comments that we received as part of the consultation process when we attended the council drop-in sessions and the meetings that we held, that there are concerns in some areas about the impact that such growth would have on road infrastructure, public transport, school places and access to health, in addition to the concerns in some areas around flood risk. To be clear, and it's been repeatedly said, the purpose of the GMSF plan at this stage and the public consultation was about the principle of sites identified following the call for sites process and to the classification of some areas of Greenbelt land. This was not an exercise to go through the minutiae detail covering every single planning eventuality for the sites that have been identified. That comes later on when the master planning exercise takes place. Nonetheless, as part of the consultation, we welcomed comments from the public, landowners and other interested parties. And just on the consultation, I think we acknowledged, both publicly at the meeting on the 6th of January and indeed afterwards, that the consultation carried out by the Combined Authority wasn't perfect, and that's why our leader made representations at the Combined Authority and secured us a 2-week extension to that consultation. Councillor Harris made reference to the fact that she doesn't agree with the 15-year plan. Well, again, just remind Councillor Harris that it was her government that set the timetable of 15-year plan. I think that's a case of selective memory. And Councillor Gartside blames the Combined Authority. Again, selective memory. The National Planning Policy Framework is laid out by government. The household projection targets are laid down by the Department for Communities and Local Government. And as the leader has repeatedly said tonight, in calling Councillor Daly out on the comments he made, the Office for National Statistics identifies...
Councillor Daly, no, sorry, no shout. No, Councillor Daly, no, look, could you sit down, please?
So I have to
sit down,
down.
would you sit down, please?
13-14.
Would you sit down, please? I'm not having members shouting at each other and having a conversation across the chamber. Councillor Walmsley, you can...
Councillor Gartside blames the Combined Authority. The National Planning Policy Framework is a government framework. The National Planning Guidance is a government guidance document. The household projection targets are set by the communities for local, the Department for Communities and Local
Standing
Government.
Order 1413, Mr. Mayor.
Come on.
The operative word being, yes, guidance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Walmsley, carry on.
Well, I'll come on to answer that point actually later on, but
You're running out of time.
I've not got much else left to say, Mr. Mayor, but just to make it clear, the leader has said repeatedly that he is prepared with David Nuttall MP to go and meet Sajid Javid in Westminster to talk about the figures. And, you know, that approach has been made to David Nuttall, and, you know, I'm sure he will respond soon. Maybe you can remind him about that. But this idea that no development can take place on greenbelt land is wholly impractical. Simple mathematics tells you that with a target of 12,700 units, of which we know we could build at least 5,000 on where we've got existing brownfield sites, that still leaves us 7,700 units short. And I accept there may be questions around the methodology used to arrive at those figures, what we're just talking about. The population growth expected, as the leader referred to, and to reiterate the point I've made around meeting the Secretary of State. Another problem that myself and the leader have referred to from the start of this process is the issue of land banking. The council has got no control over ensuring developers build on brownfield when they get planning permission. The national guidance says you have to start building a development with planning permission within 3 years. The reality is developers turn up, build a wall and leave it and wait for the housing...
wind up, Councillor Walmsley, please.
They wait for the housing prices to increase. Councillor Wright referred to a motion we discussed on Greenbelt in Council Chamber last September. He should therefore recall that what we agreed at that meeting was that we would lobby the government specifically on this issue of land banking on brownfield. We have written to the Minister twice and we're still waiting for a response to that. But just to finish, Mr Mayor, by saying that the National Planning Policy Framework says that development on Greenbelt can only take place in exceptional circumstances. The recent ruling in Sutton Coalfield suggested, where the government intervened, that housing need was a legitimate exceptional circumstance, and that allowed them the ability to build on Greenbelt land. So you've got the government saying on the one hand through the NPPF that you can't build on Greenbelt land specifically based on housing need. It's not exceptional circumstances. Yet they rule in Sutton Coalfield, actually you can. So take of that what you will. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Walmsley. Move of the amendment, Councillor Shorey has the right to sum up, and then you have the right to sum up, Councillor Pixel. Can I just say, we've given this a really good airing, I feel. So there'll be no leniency in terms of speeches and stuff, so you've got 5 minutes each, or even less. I'd be very grateful. Councillor Shorey.
Well, I'll just reiterate the point. If the NPPF applies and you can't build on Greenbelt, then the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework will fail. It's got to be signed off as part of the process by the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government. So if Greenbelt is sacrosanct, and that's what the NPPF says, we've nothing to worry about because the government won't allow it to happen. That's all I'd say, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Shorey. Councillor Pickstone.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, and thank you to all, Madam Mayor. Mr Mayor, I'm totally sorry. I've nearly grown out of it, but thank you very much, Mr Mayor. And thank the speakers for their contribution this evening. And I'd also like the Labour Group to thank the Labour Group for the constructive approach, I guess, with this amendment. I'm always happy to be. It's more constructive than it might have been, couldn't it? So I'm always happy to be surprised. I think it's good that we're lobbying to review the figures. I think it's good that you're proposing that we're thinking about the GMSF sort of pending some of the things that are on the way. And I just remind you, Councillor Shorey, that the Mayor of Greater Manchester may well be a woman. You referred to them as he earlier on. I'm looking forward to Jane
Everyone knows
Brophy
Liberal
being
Democrats won't win,
elected.
Councillor.
Looking forward to Jane Brophy being elected, but anyway. And it's good that the work is going to start again immediately on a very local plan, and that there'll be all-party involvement in a working group. But unfortunately, we won't be able to support this amendment because if we did support it, although there are some good things in it, it would mean that we would be voting to remain within the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, which is fundamentally not what we believe. Very briefly, Mr Mayor, I just want to address 3 points that were raised in the debate that I've been asked about. The first one is the reference to the Northern Gateway and somehow how it's all right that 15% of the 20% of our green belt to be lost is the Northern Gateway. What the Northern Gateway includes is all the land that's to be lost to the south of the M60 for housing, which is 3,300 houses around Simister and Bowley, which is not to be dismissed as it's just the 15%. And it is absolutely great, Councillor Jones, and I'm very, very happy for the residents of Hollins that they are not in the plan, but just because it's all right for you, Jack, sort of thing, doesn't mean it right for Simister. And I know Simister is a place that you know very well as a former police inspector for that area for a number of years. We were asked what a Bury local plan might mean, and I think fundamentally it means a local plan means we have to find our own Bury answers to some very difficult problems. And I'm very interested in some of the ideas that were suggested, I think it was by Andy Burnham, in the ideas of us regenerating our town centres and finding how we can make more for jobs and houses in those town centres as a solution moving forward. Fundamentally, a 15-year plan means that we need to find land for 9,000 something houses, not 12,000 something houses, which means that the very difficult decisions about Greenbelt can be avoided at this stage. And I was asked, how can we ignore that transport issues will be the same in a Bury plan rather than a Greater Manchester plan? But if in fact we do build more in town centres and on brownfield sites in terms of housing and jobs, then there's a much more significant use of public transport than there is of building in the middle of nowhere where the tram doesn't go, basically. So I think that's why we have an advantage of making the most of our great town centres that we have in the borough. So I think, Mr. Mayor, just to say there are some good things in this amendment, but unfortunately we're not able to support it because in doing so would mean that we wanted to stay within the GMSF. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Pickstone. I will give you the card for Specsavers opticians. Thank you for that. Can I just say thank you to members for the quality of the debate. We've had 3 really, really good debates tonight, and thank you to the members of the public for your patience and your attention and your contributions earlier during public question time. I'm really pleased that we rearranged the agenda. We do have some business to transact. We'll now move to the vote on the amendments.
Mr. Mayor, may I move Standing Order 17.5 and ask for a recorded vote? And we have 8 people.
Need 8 people.
8 people.
Okay, that's fine. We'll have a recorded vote. That's fine. So all we actually vote, just to be clear to members, we're voting on the amendment moved by Councillor Shorey and seconded by Councillor Walmsley.
I'll read members' names out alphabetically, and if you could indicate whether you're for, against or you abstain. Councillor Adams, Councillor Noel Bailey, Councillor Bevan, Councillor Black, Councillor Briggs, Councillor Caserta, Councillor Cathcart, Councillor Cummings, Councillor Dalbert, Councillor Daly, Councillor Fitzgerald, Councillor Garside, Councillor Grimshaw, Councillor Gunther, Councillor Handke,
Against.
Councillor Haroon, Councillor Harris,
Against.
Councillor Hodkinson,
Against.
Councillor Holt,
For.
Councillor Hussain,
Against.
Councillor James,
For.
Councillor Jones,
For.
Councillor Keeley,
Against.
Councillor Kelly,
For.
Councillor Kirsch,
Against.
Councillor Kerrison, Councillor Lewis, Councillor Mallon,
For.
Councillor Matthews,
For.
Councillor Mackay, Councillor Nuttall, Councillor O'Brien,
For.
Councillor Parnell,
For.
Councillor Pixton,
Against.
Councillor Preston,
For.
Councillor Quinn,
For.
Councillor Schofield,
Against.
Councillor Shorey,
For.
Councillor Skillen,
For.
Councillor Silverger,
Against.
Councillor Smith,
For.
Councillor Sarah Southworth,
For.
Councillor Susan Southworth,
For.
Councillor Tariq,
For.
Councillor Jamie Walker,
For.
Councillor Roy Walker,
Against.
Councillor Walmsley,
For.
Councillor Whitby,
For.
Councillor Steve Wright,
Against.
Councillor Yvonne Wright.
Against.
Sorry, any abstentions?
Any
Sorry.
abstentions?
That's 31. Yeah, one 17 against and
So
one abstention.
the amendment is carried and therefore becomes the substantive motion. So all those in favour of the substantive motion as
Mr Mayor,
amended.
can I move 17.5 again for a
Well,
recording?
if you get
vote on
8
the-
people to
on
stand
the
up, councillors can't sign.
substantive, like Jack Walton.
Absolutely, you just reminded me of Jack then.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll have a name vote on that. So the motion now becomes the amendment as proposed by Councillor Shorey and seconded by Councillor Walker now becomes a substantive motion.
So once again, alphabetically, Councillor Adams, Councillor Noel Bailey, Councillor Bevan, Councillor Black, Councillor Briggs, Councillor Caserta, Councillor Cathcart, Councillor Cummings, Councillor Dalbert, Councillor Daly, Councillor Fitzgerald, Councillor Garside, Councillor Grimshaw, Councillor Gunther, Councillor Hankey, Councillor Haroon, Councillor Harris, Councillor Hodkinson, Councillor Holt, Councillor Hussain, Councillor James, Councillor Jones, Councillor Keeley, Councillor Kelly, Councillor Kirsch, Councillor Kerrison, Councillor Lewis, Councillor Mallon, Councillor Matthews, Councillor Mackay, Councillor Nuttall, Councillor O'Brien, Councillor Parnell, Councillor Pixton, Councillor Preston, Councillor Quinn, Councillor Schofield, Councillor Shorey, Councillor Skillen, Councillor Silberger, Councillor Smith, Councillor Sarah Southworth, Councillor Susan Southworth, Councillor Tariq, Councillor Jamie Walker, Councillor Roy Walker, Councillor Walmsley, Councillor Whitby, Councillor Steve Wright, Councillor Yvonne Wright. Any abstentions?
So the motion as amended is carried. It's been a long evening. We do have some business still to transact. Again, can I thank members for the contribution to three very good debates and the public gallery. I'm proposing we have a 5-minute comfort break, and it will be 5 minutes that will be added on to the end of the time of the council meeting. So can you please be back in 5 minutes and we'll continue with the rest of the meeting.
We had full public questions.
25 to 1 to the 5 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, can we reconvene, please? Thought he was going to lend me some money then, Councillor Parnell. Thanks everybody. We do need to finish. Standing orders today, we finish at 25 to 11. We've added a half hour on for public question time and a 5-minute adjournment, so we're due to finish at 25 to 11, and we do have a fair bit of business that we need to transact before then. So, members, take you back to item 5 on the agenda, which is recommendations of Cabinet and Council. Meeting of the Cabinet held on the 14th of December. Review of Treasury Management Strategy to be moved by Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd formally move that to save time.
This has been seconded by Councillor Shorey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Any questions or comments? Any amendments or other motions? All those in favour? Thank you. All those against? Abstentions? Thank you. The motion is carried. Meeting of the Cabinet held on 25th of January 2017. The Mayoralty 2017-2018 to be moved by Councillor Shorey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm absolutely delighted to have the pleasure in moving a recommendation from Cabinet to endorse Councillor Gunther as the Mayor for the municipal year 2017-18. I know that Councillor Gunther is someone who is respected on all sides of this chamber, someone who's incredibly experienced. In fact, I think you became a councillor just after I passed my 11+, so I know you will bring a wealth of knowledge to the role, and charm and wit and good fun, and I know that you will be a Mayor for all the people of Bury, and I'm certainly looking forward to working with you. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Seconded by Councillor Gartside.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I also have great pleasure in seconding Councillor Gunther to be the first citizen of our borough. I know she will do it with dedication, passion and vigour. And I know that the people may disagree with me on this point, but I don't think there's one councillor in this council chamber that feels more passionately about the borough's affairs than Councillor Gunther does. And I believe that she'll make an excellent mayor, and I wish her a very enjoyable and successful is the word, which I'm sure it will be, mayoralty for 2017-18. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garside. All those in favour? Aye. Any against, if you dare? That's carried. Can I just be the very first to offer my congratulations to Councillor Dorothy Hunter. I think she'll be an excellent mayor, and I'm absolutely delighted that she's accepted the mayoralty, and I'm sure we'll have a full year working together as mayor and deputy, and I look forward to it, and I wish her and her consort the very best. I tell you now, and there will be more later, this is the best job in the world, Dorothy, and you will love it. But you'll never get those trains off me on May the 17th. Councillor Gunter.
Can I just thank you all for your sentiments? I know we've had our moments, but those moments haven't been reflected in your attitude tonight. But I would just want to say, I want to say two things. Well, I want to say one thing, which covers two councillors in this chamber tonight. I want to congratulate Councillor Connolly, and I want to congratulate Councillor Grimshaw for the marvellous, persuasive way they have persuaded my husband to be my consort. Whether it's the magic of the Paris skies, it wasn't the booze, we were all quite sober, but whether it was the magic of the Paris skies, the Paris night, or a cruise on the Seine under the Eiffel Tower, but it worked, and thank you very much, and I congratulate you once again.
I understand my next task, Councillor Gunter, is to get him in an evening suit, is it? That's fine. Thank you for that. Thanks, members. Item 6 is the leader statement and cabinet question time. A call on Councillor Shorey to make a statement on the work of the cabinet and other matters.
Well, thank you, Mr Mayor. I think somebody's getting ahead of themselves because this speech starts. Thank you, Madam Mayor. So it's either a cut and paste job or we're looking forward to Councillor Gunther already. It does give me great pleasure to update Council on the work of the Cabinet since the November meeting of Council. It would be remiss not to mention the autumn statement. We all know, of course, there's no additional funding for adult social care, and the new adult social care support grant is funded from reductions elsewhere in the New Homes bonus. Additional better care funds for future years are also funded from reductions in the New Homes bonus. Although the social care precept can be increased by a further 1%, this is minor in scale compared to the social care challenges that we face within the borough. I would add, it's also not government funding, with the burden being passed to local residents. I'm delighted that Bury Council have come 51st in the 2017 Workplace Equality Index, receiving Stonewall accreditation. This is an improvement on 60th place last year. We are also placed 4th in terms of councils in England, Scotland and Wales, which I think is a fantastic achievement. I'm also delighted that Bury Market is officially the best place to go shopping in Greater Manchester. The historic market, famed for its black pudding stalls, is top of the list to shop on TripAdvisor, with 490 out of 672 visitors giving it the maximum excellent grade. The market, which has won the Market of the Year award 4 times in the last decade, attracts almost 250,000 visitors every week and boasts almost 400 stalls and covers a total of 200,000 square feet. Our local land charges team have been shortlisted for an award for the most improved National Land Information Service. Congratulations. I'm really hopeful that they will win the award. And our legal services team have secured debt recovery work from another local authority, Bolton, as it happens, which underpins our commitment to generate income in a time of cuts. I'd like to thank all of those people who have engaged with our budget consultation process through township forums and other means, and of course the budget report will be brought to Council on the 22nd of February. We have an analysis of GCSE results, and this year Bury placed 7th out of 23 North West local authorities, and for the English Baccalaureate, performance placed Bury well above the national average. I'd highlight the work at St Marie's Primary School, which had its Ofsted on the 9th of January and was graded outstanding on all areas. This is rare and is a superb outcome for Fiona Robinson and her team. They were deemed good at their last inspection. Also, building work is expected to start in mid-March on the independent zone for Bury's care leavers at New Kershaw Street. The independent zone will increase support provided to these young people, adopting a holistic approach to address their needs and equipping them to make a successful transition into adulthood. With regard to Killerley House, a £2 million refurbishment of a rehabilitation centre for people who need to regain their confidence and skills to manage everyday living tasks and engage in their communities for people coming out of hospital and those stepping up from their own homes who need a period of rehabilitation to continue living in their own homes and prevent hospital admissions. The centre provides therapy and treatment for adults following an illness or injury and need intensive rehabilitation. The team includes physiotherapists, occupational therapists, social workers and support staff who help those who no longer need to be in hospital but are not physically ready to go home. At the heart of the revamped building will be a fully equipped therapy hub where the focus will be on helping people to regain the confidence and skills they need to manage everyday living tasks and engage in their communities when they return home. I think really importantly, 4 reablement flats will be created as a halfway home option so people can test out their abilities in a unit before going home. I think this demonstrates, Mr Mayor, that even in a time of cuts and even with massive demand challenges, we are investing in things that improve outcomes and actually will save us money in the long term and actually improve people's lives. Bury has received just under £1 million of development funding from the Greater Manchester Transformation Fund. This will enable partners, including ourselves, to ensure a dynamic and refreshed locality plan will be produced, outlining the Bury approach to wellness, including focusing on community assets, self-care, prevention and neighbourhoods. The I Will If You Will jogging programme has been extremely well received. This is a new initiative and the first of the 8 programmes started last week and almost 25 people took part. This week, 22 people came, and I think it's really important to just make that point because a lot of people were worried when I Will If You Will finish that would be sort of no legacy, but work is continuing to keep people fit and healthy. And the final remark I would make is just to pay tribute to everyone who took part in organising or participated the Holocaust Memorial event on Thursday. It was poignant, it was moving, and always makes you feel very proud of Bury because we have a very, very diverse community of which we should all be proud. But in a world at the moment which seems probably more divided than ever, perhaps potentially on religious lines in some country, I'm really proud that Bury always steps up to the plate and ensures that we remember this tragic event and learn lessons from it. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Shorey. We now move into question time. It does say in the script a maximum of 40 minutes, but we won't get that far. But the answers to any unanswered questions, of course, will be circulated to all members. A total of 28 written questions have been received. Please note that 1413 doesn't apply during question time. I'll call on the leader to answer question 1 from Councillor Mallon relating to the library's proposals.
I'd ask that Councillor Walmsley answer that question.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and to Councillor Mallon for the question. The Library Service has a considerable history of working with community groups to provide services that are both relevant to people's needs and which encourage groups and individuals to get involved. This partnership has expanded the traditional role of the Library Service to include providing and facilitating a wide range of community services, including advice, access to health-related services, social activities and environmental projects, as well as supporting community groups with training and resources. We recognise these are important services which need to continue. As part of the 3rd round of public consultation, we will be meeting with community groups and other interested parties to discuss the continuation and indeed the development of community services. Together, we'll explore options for community management of facilities, potential sources of funding and sources of support. Alternative methods of provision, such as charitable trusts and mutuals, will also be looked at. We'd also like to encourage community groups to look at working together to support each other. There is a continuing role for the library service in working with community groups, and this is expressed in the service's core offer, specifically community support and development, which includes resources for community groups, the volunteer programme and community libraries. The Cabinet report also shows that the service-wide team will be working with community groups across the borough. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary question, Councillor Mallon? If you have, can we have a short one?
Thanks, Councillor Walton, for that. Could you tell us, though, what provision is going to be made for groups like the Sensory Impairment Unit and the Reading Development Service, which is currently based at Whitefield Library? And can we give commitments to working with staff and service users to ensure smooth transition?
Thanks for the supplementary. First of all, we as a council have an equality duty to ensure that people with disabilities have access, and we need to ensure as part of this review that they're getting an enhanced service rather than one that's diminished. So we have to look at enhancing the offer that we provide for people that attend the sensory impairment unit. What we're proposing in the consultation at the moment is that we actually spread out the accessibility for users of the sensory impairment unit to either the 3 or 4 libraries, depending on the outcome of the consultation. So I think that improves accessibility. We need to make sure it doesn't water down the stock and the availability. But you're absolutely right. We need to work with service users to make sure there's a smooth transition. And to do that, we need to engage with staff and community groups and service users. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Walmsley. Call on the leader to answer question 2 from Councillor Jamie Walker relating to potholes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd ask that Councillor Quinn answer this question.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks for your question, Councillor Walker. The answer to your question is Bury Council has been allocated an additional £105,000 per annum for pothole repairs from the Department for Transport's Pothole Action Fund, and this funding ends in 2021.
Thanks, Councillor Quinn. Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Walker? Okay, thank you. Call on the leader to answer question 3 from Councillor Caserta related to cycle journeys on the A56.
I'll ask Councillor Quinn to answer that question.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Councillor Caserta, for your question. The answer is extensive consultation was carried out during the scheme development with the public, also with Transport for Greater Manchester's cycling officer and with members of the Greater Manchester Cycling Campaign. Costs for implementing the southbound cycle lane will be minimal as it's incorporated within the carriageway limits and equates to approximately £2,000 for signs, road markings and green highway surface colouring at strategic locations along its length. During the planning stage, traffic count information available showed less than 300 cycle journeys in a 24-hour period. This was during the summer and we'd expect this to reduce during the winter period. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Quinn. Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Caserta?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's not really a question anymore because I'm not even sure of the answer. So is Councillor Quinn, sorry to ask him to repeat this then, which will count as my second question, but are you saying that the 1 kilometre or nearly 2 kilometres of cycle lane as part of the project, £2 million, is costing only £2,000?
Thanks, Councillor Caserta. Councillor Quinn?
That's what it says here.
Call on the leader to answer question 4 from Councillor Parnell relating to flood defences.
The short answer is no, we don't yet have funding in place from government to build the necessary flood defences. It's the Environment Agency that's actually responsible for those and we're working with them. What I can say is that the Council has committed a sum of £2 million to contribute towards that cost, although we're not required to because we understand the importance of having flood defences in those areas that were badly affected by fluvial flooding in the Boxing Day floods.
Have a supplementary, Councillor Parnell? No, thank you. Call on the leader to answer question 5 from Councillor Kelly related to the Haworth Close Extra Care Scheme.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd ask Councillor Holt to answer this question.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank Councillor Kelly for a question. I'm pleased to inform the Council that the construction of the new 60-unit extra care scheme at the former Howard Close site off St Peter's Road, Berwick, will commence in March this year, and it is anticipated that the scheme will be completed by late 2018. The scheme, which is being built on council land, will be delivered and owned by ourselves and is supported by a £1.8 million of funding from the Homes and Communities Agency. It is intended that once operational, it will be managed in the same way as most of the council's other housing assets. This scheme, Mr Mayor, will be similar in nature to the very successful 40-bed unit extra care scheme at Red Bank in Ratcliffe. Units will be made available to people requiring this type of accommodation in accordance with criteria and at affordable rent levels. Providing such high-quality, affordable extra care accommodation will make a significant contribution to meeting housing needs in the borough, associated with a growing and ageing population. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Why did you look at me then when you talked about an ageing population, Councillor Hunt? Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Kelly? No, thank you. Call on the leader to answer question 6 from Councillor Roy Walker relating to the demolition of the former police station.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The contractor that was commissioned to do demolition work went into administration. The council then sought to negotiate with the parent company of this contractor, so we didn't have to go out and re-tender. That proved unsuccessful, so we're now going to have to go back out into the market and commission someone else to demolish the police station. But that is why there's been a delay in its demolition.
Have a supplement, Councillor Walker.
Well, I didn't really get the idea of when you're going out to tender and how long we're waiting for that. But could I say it is an eyesore? I'm deeply ashamed of it. I know there are practical problems with it, so I'm not blaming any individual. But it's gone on for a long time now, and it could be a site for numerous apartments, thus reducing in a small way the incursion into Greenbelt land that we've been talking about earlier. Does he not agree? Thank you.
We're in the process of re-tendering now. So obviously the tendering process, we need to get tenders back for people who actually can do the work. But I would just make the point. Obviously this is a police station which is right next door to residential homes. So you're talking about demolishing a building of that size and scale. Not everyone has the expertise to do that. It needs to be nibbled down. There's also issues with asbestos. So quite frankly, let me make the point. Quite frankly, I'd rather we spent the time to get the right people to do it than take risks with public safety. And I'd also make the point, you know, in your question you said it's got the appearance of a bomb site. Bury Town Centre is one of the most successful in Greater Manchester. I've just mentioned how our market is so successful. You know, our town centre is something to be proud of, and it really annoys me when people try and do it down and try and score political points. It's a brilliant town centre. I've given you a reason why we haven't demolished it. It's to protect the public and get the right people in to do the job.
Thank you, Councillor Shorey. Call on the leader to answer question 7 from Councillor O'Brien relating to park life.
I'll ask Councillor Quinn to answer that question.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Councillor O'Brien, for your question. The answer is the Park Life concerts will take place at Eden Park on, as usual, on my birthday, June the 10th, as is tradition, and the 11th of June, but there is no Friday concert this year. Thank you.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor O'Brien?
Just a brief one about the Park Life Community Fund. I think it's this coming week we're dishing it out. I just want to know if you know next year we're going to have the opportunity to access that fund for local charities in Prestwich.
Thanks for that one. And the answer is yes. And they have promised more money this year. And as well as that, I will be going around with Park Life's officers, visiting local businesses, getting people's concerns, and trying to make sure that Prestwich does benefit even more than we did last year from Park Life. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Quinn. Call on the leader to answer question 8 from Councillor Haroon relating to hate crime.
I'd ask Councillor Tarrant to answer that question.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Haroon, for your question. I'm pleased to advise the Council that tackling hate crime is one of our top priorities over the next few months. We've been working with our partners such as Great Manchester Police to try and understand these important issues. The number of hate crime incidents in Bury has risen. However, this may be due to underreporting in previous years, and we've been working very hard recently to raise awareness and to encourage our residents to report incidents. No form of hate crime is acceptable, and we have a duty to keep members of our communities safe. Mr Mayor, I'd like to tell the Council of the work that we're doing in tackling hate crime, where we're working with schools, with our young people, with teachers, and we've held events with our Year 7 and 8 pupils across the borough, with a specific focus on hate crime. Members will already be aware of the successful Be Safe, Be Cool initiative that takes place every year with our Year 9 pupils right across the borough, and it has a specific hate crime element to it. I am pleased to advise that we have established an inter-school youth hate crime forum, which brings together pupils from right across the borough and again focuses specifically on hate crime. And Mr. Mayor, I'm looking forward to addressing their conference at the end of February. We're also working hard with partners and our third-party reporting centres to raise awareness of hate crime within our communities. We've undertaken specific training with various groups, which include groups around disability, transgender, and also new arrivals and refugees. We are seeing more centres opening to encourage reporting of this nature. I am pleased to advise the Council that Hate Crime Awareness Week begins next week on the 6th of February, and there will be a number of events right across the borough. We have commissioned 5 community-based projects run by the voluntary sector, and these will be launched during next week. And we'll be touring the borough with a van displaying messages about hate crime, visiting schools, community organisations and other sites. Bury College are holding Diversity Day, and school assemblies will focus on hate crime also next week. And we are also working with the police and interacting with the public within the town centre during next week as well, via a mobile police station. Hate crime, Mr. Mayor, is unacceptable in any form, and I am sure that the Council will agree that the measures that I have outlined will help keep our communities safe. The work continues beyond Hate Crime Awareness Week, and I will keep Council updated on the progress of this work.
Thank you, Councillor Tweed. Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Haroon?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Awareness Week for Bury.
Can you keep your answer brief, Councillor?
Mr. Mayor, just in terms of on the 8th of February, Mr. Mayor, in the morning, we're launching the Hate Crime Awareness Fund, which has very generously been offered to us by the Office of the Police and Crime Commission. That's £10,000 offered to this borough. We met on the second week of January to go through the applications, and we have made a judgment as to which organisations are going to benefit from this money. The organisations will be holding events during the week and beyond, again to raise awareness of hate crime. We look forward to working with all our organisations. And just very quickly, Mr. Mayor, something that will be unique for Bury compared to other Great Manchester authorities, we've hired a digital van which will tour across the borough, which will have various messages of promoting hate crime awareness and sort of encouraging people to report it. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank the officers for working on this project. It's only been a few weeks since it was suggested, and they've turned around it very, very quickly. And I'd just like us all in this chamber to take the opportunity of Hate Crime Awareness Week to take the message back into our communities, rather than shake hands with or hold hands with fascists and racists. Is to stand.
Can we just let him finish? But can you finish quickly,
instead,
Councillor
Mr. Mayor,
Tweed,
should be to
please?
stand up to those sorts of people, and the message is very clear: love trumps hate.
I did ask you to be brief, Councillor Tweed. Call on the leader to answer question 9 from Councillor Steve Wright related to school exclusion.
I'll ask Councillor Briggs to answer that question.
Councillor Briggs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Wright. In 2013-14, the number of permanent exclusions were 26, with 1,371.5 days lost to fixed exclusion. In 2014-15, the number of permanent exclusions rose to 54, as did the number of fixed terms exclusions, and there was 1,811.5 days lost. Whilst the number of permanent exclusions fell slightly to 51 in 2015-16, the worrying upward trend in fixed-term exclusions continued when a total of 2,173 days were lost. In 2016-17, to date, there have been 40 permanent exclusions and 1,249 days lost to fixed-term exclusions. These figures suggest that the previous totals will be suppressed by the end of this academic year. Data from other local authorities in the region is not available. However, anecdotal feedback from North West Exclusion Network indicates that similar spikes in both primary and secondary level exclusions are being experienced elsewhere. It should be noted that direct comparisons between local authority areas are difficult, given the different ways that each authority handles exclusions. For example, you've probably heard of the term managed moves, which these managed moves reduce the reported number of exclusions, so basically it floors the figures. This is a worrying trend. We do take it seriously, and we're working very effectively with our schools, and we hope to reverse that trend.
Thanks, Councillor Briggs. Do you have a supplementary? And this will be the last one.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank Councillor Briggs for the answer. Can you just elaborate on the work we are doing to try and get these figures down, please, Councillor Briggs?
Right, thank you. There are a number of initiatives, quite a lot really. I'm sorry we're short of time to actually go into great depth about them. But it's review of teams to offer more integral, holistic response at the most appropriate time through a key worker role. Consideration being given to include healthy young mind workers within the local authority response to avoid the 6-month wait that children and young people currently have before being seen by CAMS. Reintegration support work included information meetings and person-centred meetings to ensure pupils that have been permanently excluded can be reintegrated successfully back into mainstream and avoid a second permanent exclusion. Changes to the EPS and A&T services to offer a more holistic approach to schools rather than a focus on individual casework. Strong LA challenge at permanent exclusion stage to make schools more accountable. And I think, we need to be strong on that point. LAs to challenge schools using long-term fixed exclusions of 6 days or longer. Children, young people in care and SEN pathway being developed to ensure that permanent exclusion of both these vulnerable groups is avoided. Positive pupil placements or trials offered to all secondary schools as a way of avoiding a permanent exclusion. PPSs are trials that are failing at the receiving school now have come back through the in-year fair access for discussion by egg teacher colleagues, so it's like a more joint approach really in problem solving. Alternative available to permanent exclusion, particularly in years by means of Year 11 referrals to Spring Lane. And consultation is being undertaken with senior pastoral leader groups, which is now underway regarding Key Stage 3 alternatives provision for pupils who would benefit from a more vocational pathway. These outcomes to be discussed at the next meeting. And I think that last point is a point to consider really, that, in terms of league tables and wanting results, it is not always possible for our young people to actually gain those results. And a more vocational curriculum would benefit a lot of our young people. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Briggs. Councillor Shorey.
I move that the whole of the remaining business before the council be approved, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much for that. Understanding orders, that means that that concludes the business before us this evening, and I declare the meeting closed. Can I say that staff in the balcony bar have been eagerly waiting to serve us all night. I, for one, am going for a pint. I would hope that 1 or 2 other members will come into the bar and use the facility as well. Can I thank you for your attendance? Can I thank you for your contributions? And those of you who aren't coming for a pint, I wish you all a safe journey home. Thank you.